Welcome everybody to the Squamish Nation Traditional Territory. We'd like to adopt the adoption of the agenda. Can I get a first for that, Sarah? Second, Crossland. Committee minutes, the May 4th, 2017 Advisory Design Panel meeting minutes. Can we move to approve those?
I just wanted an addition.
You wanted an addition?
Just a word, actually. On page 8 of the minutes, under the bullet point, if this development is looking to cater to people who are downsizing or aging in place. You can add
Downsizing and aging?
Yeah, and or aging place was part of the comments for one level. That's it.
I had a couple, page 3, first sentence. There's a roof access by ladder, an elevator room overrun. I don't believe that project had an elevator overrun. I think that was my concern on the access to the roof.
It wasn't drawn.
Oh, there isn't a...
I think it had an elevator.
Okay, that actually had roof access? Okay.
Well, I think it had to have an overrun, but it wasn't showing.
To some extent, yeah.
Okay. And I wondered about...
Is there, so no addition there?
Yeah, we'll just leave it as is, yeah, so. And then page 5, the waterfront landing sub-area plan, there doesn't seem to be any acknowledgement that that's a preliminary application, so we didn't vote on it.
No.
So I don't know, maybe somewhere that this is highlighted as a preliminary.
I noticed that too, because I missed the last meeting and I was looking for a
Yeah.
resolution of what was happening at the end, and it just,
Yeah,
there wasn't anything, so.
so that would make sense, then,
You
if
just
there
have
was
to clarify.
no motion. I think that's it on mine. Yep.
Any other comments, anybody? Can you move, once you have included those, then can we move to adopt those? Or to approve them? Crossland, Sarah again. Business Rising, the first one is process update and discussion, official community plan draft release. That's you, Sarah.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah McJanet. I'm a community planner with the district. I know some of you, but not all. And I'm here today to give you an update in terms of where we are at with the official community plan update that's been in process for a little while, and highlight some upcoming opportunities for that are happening for engagement, and also to talk about the scoping and ongoing work on development permit area guidelines under the plan. So we've come panel before to talk about that. So I just want to continue the conversation just to give you a sense of where things are at and when we will be coming back forward for more discussion. So up on the screen, you'll see the overall phasing for the project. We are still in phase 3 in the plan drafting. So just to take you back in January of 2016, we initiated the OCP update. This was a phase where we're doing visioning, talking about big ideas. We used a series of backgrounders to set context for Squamish and where we've been and the trends that we're facing. In phase 2, we engaged further and developed a series of discussion guides and asked the community to host OC pizza parties to tackle issues related to growth, to resiliency and thriving Squamish. And so as the process went on, we used all of the inputs through phases 1 and 2. And then last week, we went out to the community with a discussion draft of the plan, doing our best job to bring all these pieces together for the community to check in. We also, at the recommendation of our community advisory committee, we produced a highlight reel in the form of an executive summary of the plan in 12 pages that we put in the chief. So that was really an intent to give people a flavor of what the key policy objectives or the plan goals, policy objectives and policies are all about, because we know that not everyone is interested or has the time to go into the full discussion draft. So that was a way to present the the nuts and bolts of the plan. And so in terms of engagement right now, we are in another engagement period in phase 3 that runs for about 4 weeks long. So we released the discussion draft. At the same time, we opened another survey to ask the community, are we on the right track? We have an upcoming community event that we've been advertising next Wednesday at Brennan Park from 6 to 9. This is a family-friendly event, and at that event we're going to be, we'll have 5 stations that mirror the 5 key OCP goals, and community members can come out and learn more about the discussion draft that's out in the community, find out about what the goals mean and what are the key, the topics and the main objectives and policy areas that we're trying to tackle. And importantly, this will also be a chance for people to have a look at all of the mapping, like the spatial aspects of the OCP. And all of this information is online right now. We've been doing sort of a big blitz to get the word out. And then finally, I'm running around Squamish right now doing some mobile pop-up engagement, and that will continue for an entire month. So we're going to like key places around town, and we're dropping into the high school. I'm at the Welcome Center next week. I'm doing like a tailgate up at Trailhead on Friday. I was on the farm this morning, and we're just.
Beer?
What's that?
Beer too?
Well, no, not officially, but
Cozies provided?
yeah, totally. So yeah, just trying to get the word out and highlighting for the community kind of where we're at and how important it is for us to check in and make sure that we're on the right track. So we're at that pivotal point. And just going back to this, this image for a second. So what we're doing is through this next wave of engagement, we're going to be doing the survey, the event, and taking in all the input that we can. That input will be used to refine the final draft of the plan before we do agency review, before we go back in front of council. So over the summer, we'll be refining and taking in all the inputs. We will also produce a phase 3 engagement summary that we'll bring back to our community advisory committee, back to council as well. And so that community advisory committee has been really key because their whole MO is to make sure that the district is taking in that input and that it's being thoughtfully considered and considered in the plan. So they've been working to advise staff in that regard, so that's been fantastic. And so just wanted to highlight a couple things that you'll see. I've been before design panel previously to talk about kind of the official community plan and all the development permit areas. So with this OCP update, we have introduced a new hazard development permit area. This is new, and I've brought this up around the panel table before. So we've been doing this 3-year integrated flood hazard management plan, and in terms of that process, that is substantially informing the official community plan land use policy, as well as we've created a hazard development permit area. So the whole point is a designation for protection of development from hazardous conditions. So this is development permit area 2, so you'll see this in the discussion draft. And just briefly, I wanted just to highlight the relationship. So our integrated flood hazard management plan, it's been a highly technical piece that has created a bunch of policy recommendations that have been, if you can see this up there, that feed into the official community plan, as well as informing the creation of a development permit area, number 2, for hazardous conditions. And then also external to the official community plan, one of the key pieces coming out, the recommendations coming out of the flood hazard management plan is a floodplain bylaw that Squamish has never had before. So these are all, this is a big conversation, and it might be something that we can bring back before council or before panel at another session. But just to say that, we've got flood hazard management plan that's translating into new hazard policy at the highest level under our community plan, development permit area guidelines, and then and also this floodplain bylaw. So those are, it's been a lot of heavy lifting in terms of trying to fit all these pieces together in a way that makes sense.
is that floodplain bylaw, is that like pertaining to building and development specifically?
Yeah, so what the floodplain I know this is hard to read and apologies for that. The floodplain bylaw, in a nutshell, what it does is it designates the floodplain, and then within the floodplain, it regulates flood construction levels and setbacks, and also speaks to construction specifications. So in the past, we've been doing like these site-by-site flood hazard assessments. So what this does is that based on all of the updated modeling, it sets the floodplain and the FCLs, and then it also has, it talks to like if somebody wants to vary or get an exemption from the set floodplain level. And I don't want to get into the weeds here today and go into detail there, but I just wanted to sort of highlight that that's there's the floodplain bylaw. And
I just wanted to clarify that it
Yeah.
wasn't just like what's currently existing in the building bylaw. This is like a much broader scoped, generalized plan for entire areas.
yeah, but it's down to, like, it sets the FCL across the floodplain within the municipality, but down to, my understanding is that, and maybe you guys can correct me if I'm incorrect, but it sets those FCLs like down to, like within, like a meter of
It sets up seals for every area.
every area.
So the building model doesn't have to do anything with FCLs. Right now, some of it is in our zoning bylaw,
Mhm.
and
Or
the rest of it is
that's-
kind of left up to
Yeah.
the engineers.
Is that affecting municipal projects too, I guess, like roads and sidewalks is the big one we're seeing?
Well, those wouldn't necessarily have to meet the
No.
FCL.
Somehow
It's the
informing it,
habitable
though?
space.
Yeah.
It will inform how, in some cases, buildings interact with the street,
Yeah.
and how they look because of some of the conditions around, scouring around foundations and
And
things
the
like that.
citing.
So like the office park, I was
From-
thinking
from
about the
floodways.
change in FCL from phase 1 to the new ones we saw a couple of weeks ago, right?
Mhm.
Just how now all the new buildings are up and the sidewalks, same thing, so I'm just curious.
And I think the intent is in some of those cases is to keep the streets low because they're act as floodways.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what the policy does, and for example, in the development permit area 2, basically it regulates development in the floodways and in debris flow areas. So for the first time, you'll see like designated primary and secondary floodways, and there's policy related to these, so it's super, super technical. And it's been guided by the flood hazard management plan and all of the technical review there. But so basically, the flood hazard management plan, there's a whole slew of recommendations that we are already in process of implementing through this OCP update, which is really great. So they're marching along in tandem. The other development permit area that you will see within the discussion draft that just came online is development permit area 1, which is a revised environmental DP area. So what it does is what we've done is we've integrated all of the sensitive ecosystems inventory, environmentally sensitive areas mapping work that has happened in the municipality in the last 2 years, 2-3 years maybe. It integrates that mapping, and so it sets up and identifies medium and highly sensitive medium and high environmentally sensitive areas. So that covers terrestrial, wetland, marine, foreshore areas, and critical habitats. And so this is like it's like a mega EDPA, and it brings in all the riparians. So instead of currently, as you know, we have like development permit area 1 for environmentally sensitive areas, and then another separate development permit area 11 for riparian area protection. This brings it all together under one environmental DPA. Again, there's a lot of technical sort of background work that has fed into that, so that is included in the discussion draft that's out now. This is an excerpt from the discussion draft table of contents, and I just wanted to highlight, if you're looking for this material, it's in part 5, which has all the development permit area guideline information. So it talks to the designations, the exemptions, we've included development permit area 1 and 2. We are intending to do development permit area 3 for steep slopes. This is in progress, it's not included. And then finally, all of our form and character DP areas that you deal most closely with, that this is something that is ongoing. We've talked about it before. We've made some progress on development permit area 7, which is for multi-unit development. But basically, all of the form and character development permit areas need to be overhauled. We're working, but it's ongoing. We weren't able to release the discussion draft with all of the policy and all of the overhauled development, form and character development permit areas. So the scope of it is just too big. So what we've done is with the discussion draft, you've got official community plan, vision, goals, policies, development permit areas 1 and 2, the 2 new overhauled ones for hazard and environment. And then what we will do is bring forward the form and character piece as a separate piece. We will be coming back to this table to talk about how we're tackling that one. In addition, there's also designations for energy and water conservation and reduction of GHGs that we want to pull into that as well. But we just haven't had the capacity to do it all at the same time. So I wanted to just highlight that for design panel so that you know that we haven't forgotten about all the work that that needs to be done, and also some of the initial conversations that we've had at this table. And so we've got all that material, and we're just going to keep advancing it. We did also host some discussion with council a little while ago about prioritizing development permit area updates around accessibility, and Sarah was kind of to help out with some of that discussion. So that is a priority going forward as well. And then we've got all the sort of healthy built environment pieces to bring in as well. So it's still quite a bit of work to come, but we wanted to highlight that. So with that, I wanted to really encourage everyone to have a look at the executive summary. I have a couple of minutes if it's okay, just to hear from you if you do have some questions or feedback to date. Really today was just intended to as a touch point with you, just so you know what's kind of going on, and also to help you or to ask that you spread the word in the community. We've had a good response. People are really interested, but yeah, there's a lot of information to digest. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Maybe one, I mean, has to do with more the DPAA 5 that we haven't got to. But like, can you just summarize how the OCP is going to influence projects that are coming through planning, and how much, how much weight it actually is going to hold on decisions for public and for professionals?
So it's a great question, Chris. I mean, the official community plan is used every day in decision making once it's adopted. So for example, like any kind of land development application that comes before council, is reviewed against the extent to which it is meeting and advancing the goals and objectives and the policies specifically of the plan. So projects and land use reports that are coming forward to council, like there's review against the policies. So it's the highest level plan for the community, and it affects budget decisions. It affects like capital investments and improvements. And the plan is broadly covers all those elements, like from transportation, growth management, housing.
So will it kind of trump bylaws and zoning? Like say on a rezoning, and if we're not caught up on the areas, or even on rezoning, which is kind of a one-off, like a CE zone or something, will this guide those initial
When we get closer to the point, like at this point, we've heard from the public, the input, we've drafted something, and now we're going back out to the public to say, hey, did we get this right? I think until we get that input from the public that we got it right, I don't think it's usable.
No, I just more meant in the kind of order of operations of projects, only because that's what I do, so, but how, I don't usually see OCP in conversations, right? I see bylaw and zoning, but when I'm supporting certain agendas within this, I'm just curious how, at what level of the permit process those become discussed with developers or architects, or is it only at the council level?
Oh, no,
I just don't know.
So if someone goes for a rezoning, they can basically look at the OCP and see if what they're proposing is lining up with the OCP.
Exactly.
Yeah, so which brings me to the point, is like if you guys are proposing certain commercial areas or mixed use areas or something like that, how, because I was thinking of the project that we looked at last week, what does the OCP say about that piece of land? What is, and how did you get there? What determined if you said, okay, we wanted to have a sleeping neighborhood for Vancouver, what is the zoning that you put in place for that?
Yeah, and so I'll just speak to that specifically. I mean, certainly as part of the official community plan, we do have, you know, it includes Schedule B, and you're going to want to have a close look at Schedule B. It's the land use schedule, which identifies future intended land use. So that is a really critical schedule, and you will see that, you know, within the community, it doesn't, the future intended land use doesn't necessarily line up with what the zoning might be on a specific parcel of land on the ground. So the effect of an adopted official community plan as a legal bylaw is that in future, new zoning that's enacted by the municipality needs to be consistent with the official community plan. And if it's not, then that's cause for concern. So we have to either, you know, amend the official community plan, which is not a small thing, to align it. So it does have effect. It does influence the zoning that the district would enact.
Further to that, then is there a timeline or plan in place once the OCP has been adopted to ratify the zoning bylaw to reflect the OCP? Like, is that something
That's
that
the
will
next,
inevitably
that's the next
follow?
project after the OCP is
Okay.
going to be to overhaul the zoning bylaw.
So
Yeah.
ideally, the two will actually be
Eventually.
Yes.
eventually be
The zoning bylaw has to
Supplementary.
reflect the OCP.
And
The
then-
OCP will trump everything initially, well, not trump, but guide,
Only on the
guide
zoning.
discussion, right.
And then-
development permits.
So with for the OCP and then the zoning bylaw, when those are put into place, if it conflicts with the zoning that is currently in place that maybe was set 30 years ago on a piece of land, will that zoning stay in effect until somebody goes to attempt to change it? And then it would have to be changed in accordance with the zoning.
Yeah.
It couldn't be.
Not always,
Yeah.
I guess, right? Sometimes, like we just went through, some areas get rezoned.
Yeah, so the
Before-
district might take the initiative to bring it in line with the OCP, or, you know, if an application comes forward, then we'll look at the OCP.
And can that happen with land that's already privately held?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
it was
Oh,
permitted?
absolutely.
It can.
Yeah.
Because there is examples of where the zoning actually changed and what is there is just non-conforming anymore.
Well, this whole neighborhood
Yes.
downtown is industrial and there's houses all over the place and it's going to, the downtown neighborhood plan suggests a direction
Yeah.
that's probably closer to the OCP, so.
Just going back to the waterfront landing example, you know, that area has a sub-area plan, which is part of the OCP, and what is being proposed now, so it's already in the OCP, it was mainly a residential neighborhood. What's
In
being,
the current OCP?
yeah,
Not
under the current
proposed.
sub-area plan.
Okay, yeah.
What was being proposed is a lot more commercial, and lower density of housing, which is a problem. But it was not in line with the OCP. So they were actually making strides towards where we're heading now. Our current OCP really focuses commercial growth to downtown, and it doesn't look across the channel. It talks about most of it being on Cleveland and on the oceanfront.
Because it did come up that we didn't really have a context of seeing how did these guys get to this point. We didn't have the background to understand. It's planning with lots of studies and all of those things tell you this is the highest and best use that you're going to get here. And then some of us contradicted that, or was this just like, hey, why don't we try doing this? And we didn't have a context to put that information to.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so there's lots of juicy stuff to consider with the OCP, and there's something for everyone to check out in terms of interest. So not necessarily just around this table, but personally for you to get engaged and to let us know how you think we're doing. The time is now to, within this next month, to really get that feedback in so that it will really help guide us in these next stages around plan refinement. And what I will say is that there's very much a focus around neighborhood nodes, complete neighborhoods, huge focus around active transportation and connecting neighborhoods within the community, around a mix and diversity of housing across the entire continuum. The plan, more than ever before, has a really strong focus around social planning and social policy to support everyone in the community, no matter where they are, to thrive. And so the goals are really cross-cutting and reflect that. And then, of course, just around resiliency and around bringing in all of the new hazard policy, around social connections to improve resiliency and all the rest, and engagement. So there's lots in there.
I was curious to see the example communities that were for the streets, just the examples that were given in there, and I wanted to ask, were there, when this overhaul was happening, like either at council level or planning level, were there any communities that were looked at that were already kind of almost an ideal goal, like that had reached a community plan that was something that was attainable for it to be adopted by this, or that you wanted to model what Squamish turned into?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think just in terms of the plan itself, or just the where
Well, the
where
plan
the community
and
is
the
at.
goals, like I understand this is a massive undertaking to do from scratch, and I was just curious seeing examples that were within BC already of being able to turn around streetscapes and get things changed in already established towns, if there was official community plans
So
that
those are-
implemented already that were
Yeah.
very, very desirable in terms of where planning and council was
Yeah.
coming from.
You're referring to the examples that are part of the other part of the attachment?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
sorry, okay, yeah, I was not following.
Sorry.
I was like, okay,
That was
not,
a bit distant.
that's actually not in the community plan, like, or maybe I've missed something, really. My brain's exploding anyway, so I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I mean, in terms of other communities, in terms of like trying to emulate or aspire to, you know, no. I mean, we looked at lots of different community plans out there, but this update is really coming from within. Like it's, yeah. I mean, I think certainly it's. I mean, it's full of like what is considered to be, I think, strong progressive planning practice, but also it will be influenced by lots of the initiatives that are underway here, like just in terms of, you know, all this, you know, sensitive areas mapping work, and like it's really just bringing in all the stuff that we've been working on and then thinking ahead to the future and, you know, what we need to be mindful of going forward in terms of climate and, you know, building a strong community where everyone knows each other and maintaining that, like as we grow, maintaining that small town feel and spirit that people are telling us like that is so important
Is there growth projections? This is kind of trying to, what is it, population-wise?
So, and actually I did bring a copy in, but so there's a low, medium, and high growth projection, but if we follow the kind of the medium growth trajectory for Squamish, it would be around 34,000 for 2036. So that assumes, you know, kind of probably between like a 2 and a 3% growth rate per year. If you track how we've been growing over time, and based on the projections that we've had over time, it's been more on the low end. But compared to other municipalities in the region, our growth has tracked a little bit higher than other corridor communities, although in the last census, like Whistler was way higher growth than we.
Sarah, does your growth projections reflect what is going on in the building department right at this moment?
Yeah.
we took into consideration the number of housing starts we have annually, and we also looked at what's the capacity inside our existing neighborhoods to accommodate this growth for the next 20 years.
Then the other question that I have is that if you guys engage with any consultants to, like for instance, I know other communities and developers and work with people like Thomas Consultants, which basically look at what is your mixes that you get in your commercial area for the type of, and they just bring so much experience, specialized experience. Have you guys worked with anybody outside to help help you guys make sure that you're on track with what you want to be?
Just in terms of, are you talking about like, in terms of capacity of like commercial and office and different
Yeah,
things?
and the mix between them and location and the sizes and all those things.
Yeah, I mean, the plan itself draws substantially on the work that was done in 2014 for us with EcoPlan International around the employment lands strategy and all of the work that fed into that. So looking at projections over time in terms of our population, our employment projections, how much available commercial, office, and employment land we have and will need in the future. So all of that's been brought in for consideration as part of the plan itself.
And do the other bodies such as Coastal Health and the Ministry of Education, are they using the figures that you're coming up with internally in terms of planning for increasing schools, hospital beds, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so we, as part of our OCP update, we consult with and engage agencies like the school district and the board. So we have been having discussions as we go. The school district is also doing like long-range strategic facilities planning right now. So we're sort of sharing data and looking at the numbers that they have, and they're watching, like, and looking at our growth projections as well, and where that growth is projected to happen. So there are a number of future school sites that are secured already for long term. It's just a matter of like how quickly does the school district, and based on our growth in children and families, how quickly are we going to need to access those sites essentially. The school district, based on their provincial funding, like they're a bit more reactive, and they don't get the same kind of lead time. Like they have to, schools have to show, like they end up installing, tons of portables, like maxing out on portables before they get funding to be able to build a new school site. So, but we're working closely, we need to be working more closely with them around that.
I have a question for you on the multifamily. We know best practice today is to say that every multifamily should have a percentage for age in place, for seniors, for disability, instead of having a specific building that is like, hey, where do you live? Well, me and my parents, we live in that building. Does the OCP address that so that it's in the core of this, and developers, we don't ever have to ask the developer, hey, do you meet your percentage of disability? Or for seniors, we can just assume every building will do its part in that. How do we address that?
You'll see that in the housing section, there's definitely policy guiding like a bunch of different things, like around inclusionary zoning and percentages, in terms of making sure there's a mix of housing, and then special needs housing, and like all the way from like seniors housing, housing for families. It's high level guidance, and certainly doesn't replace specific policy that we might want to craft and be more prescriptive about in the future. So sometimes in the plan you'll see sort of higher level policy that then needs to get drilled down into, like for example through like the community amenity policy or other specific policy. But we've started to go there. You'll see some policy that's trending a bit more prescriptively.
So let me rephrase my question.
It does say so in
Yeah. How do you guys see that being addressed in as a general for every building, or for bigger neighborhoods, so that you would have? How do you guys see that being playing out?
I think it's going to have to play out for developments or redevelopment over a certain size, because there's some developments that are so small that it's a big challenge for them to meet all of the objectives of the OCP, but over a certain size that every development would have. a target that they have to.
Yeah. Go for it, Carson.
Sarah, I've absorbed a lot of this, is an incredible amount of work here, but in my experience sitting on panel looking at projects that come through, livability seems to be a big one. Certainly as we're looking at higher density, the quality of open space is shrinking and, the size of the open space is shrinking and the quality is significantly diminished. So what I'm assuming if we're going to the livability section, what is there for regional, community, neighborhood, and block open space? Because a lot of these projects are zero lot line and their sense of open space is developing. So where does that fit in here? How can that fit in?
For sure. There's definitely a lot of policy in the, it ends up coming out through a couple areas, through the, like in the parks and recreation and sort of open space network, making sure that we have, every residence has like access to open space within a certain distance. Then through the development permit area guidelines, just around open space and social sort of connections and activating spaces, we can do that through the development permit area guidelines more specifically, but at a higher level policy area, or from a higher level policy, it's coming up in a couple places around the healthy built environment, the parks and recreation policy area, and I'm thinking there's another one, I'm just not, yeah, it's a good one, we can tease those out for you if you like.
So on one level, there's public initiatives to develop open space, but then there'll be requirements at the larger scale developments also to provide semi-private or private.
Exactly, yeah, it's kind of like a hierarchy, not a hierarchy, but there's different kind of elements that we're going for. The Parks and Rec Master Plan that was done, and the Parks Acquisition Guidelines, and also just the Parks Classification, like we know there are deficiencies in specific neighborhoods and areas, so that's been brought in, so we're taking a more equitable lens to make sure that we have enough neighborhood parks, and that the distribution of neighborhood park lands and investment in park infrastructure and play spaces is not forgotten.
So I guess at the risk of being redundant, I think that should somehow take a foothold in the livability section.
For sure. And keep in mind, like the executive summary is really a really high level. Like the discussion draft is over 150 pages. It's at least so, and it's not going to be able. Like we're going to have to refine it, but there's a lot in there. So what you're seeing in the executive summary is very much a teaser.
Further to what Rosalind's bringing up too, something that we've repeatedly commented on in a lot of the multifamily developments, especially that have come into the downtown, is a lack of proposals that include the use of roof space. Roof space, like either as green roof or as amenity space, like obviously for the residents and tenants of there, but I think that's a really good way to help increase, like with the building heights and everything else, and a general lack of sunshine that Squamish has so much of the year here often too, is, I don't know if that would be an OCP sort of suggestion that ends up getting more implemented into, say, the zoning bylaw, but I think that there's enough people that were consistently asking questions about that and bringing that up, that if that sort of thing can be put in there, even if it's not mandatory, but like there's a real incentive to utilize that space. It takes some of the heat off of the actual footprint in some cases to be able to still get those zero lot lines.
I think some of that also comes from, it's a controlled, safe, outdoor green space for people to use, for the building to use. Where in the more public places in the street, you can go and put a basketball court or something like that people can use, but you can't put a basketball court on top of the roof. So I think that there's opportunities there that is more specific for stuff that is more community-based and stuff that's more for the tenants. Any other comments? Landscaping comments? Councilor?
Oh, I'm good. No, thanks for all that. We had this presentation little while ago, and I'm just thinking that you guys should go first, and we should go second, instead of us going first. Because I heard, I heard all these good ideas that the council didn't bring up. So I guess we'll try and figure out how to address that. I'll try and write them down and remember, but I'm sure staff will bring the good ideas forward. Talking about the green space. We don't talk about that much at City Hall like the ADP does. And I think over a few of the developments that this group's gone over and heard all those comments, we have to get those filtered into the decision makers to hear.
Well, the OSP hasn't gone for any readings yet, so it's.
No, I know
it's
that,
an
but,
open-
but we did
Well-
hear this presentation before these guys. And I don't know if that's the best order, because we don't get to benefit from the comments I heard today that I thought, oh, that's good, no, I really like that.
Yeah, I mean, with some policy, you want to go to council first, make sure the council has a look at it and they're
Yeah.
okay with this going out to the public. And then we start engaging all the
Yeah.
other groups and stakeholders.
It's a little bit of a catch-22, where you have to kind of get all the information in, and then you kind of have to sort it, and then process it and line it up and sort it. It's, it's very difficult to, like you say, Sarah, there's so much information to really start getting in, hey, have you done this, and hey, have you done that, and it's people trying to catch up with, just thinking about the amount of time you guys have spent on this, and
Well, I will say it shows up in different areas, right? Like you have to think about the OCP being this like umbrella policy document, right? And it's driving us, it's saying, here's what's important to the community, access to outdoor and social areas within our neighborhoods and within our developments. And then that plays out through the development permit area guidelines that gets down to, this should go on roofs, or you need to provide it in this part of the site. And then in the zoning bylaw, you've got prescribed minimum usable open space area, right? So that all these different levels all these different bylaws and regulations and guidelines are all supporting that fundamental objective, which is to make sure that we are that residents have adequate open space to recreate and for the local community. So all those things have to work together. And so the OCP is one part of it, and the guidelines, then there's zoning, and so all these things have to work together. And it's about making the linkages. And I think we're getting there. It's happening.
it's really exciting to see.
It's a progression, right? And we don't have it all right. So yeah, please engage with us some more.
Any other thoughts, anybody?
Well, just if anybody hasn't seen the video the planning department made, it's fabulous. And has anyone watched that video?
You don't know that there was a video.
Yeah,
So
we can
I
send
went
it
out
on
like Rick Mercer style around the community. It was pretty fun.
And I think
We were just
Sarah,
trying to get
Mr.
community
Collin,
voices.
I think she did.
Ted's making me embarrassed. My first OCP video.
So, yeah.
But it is really, really good. I was really impressed.
So everybody's gonna be at the May 24th meeting? We've got, I don't know if you mentioned it, Sarah.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Yeah, please come out, but there's other, if you can't make it out.
And spread the word.
When you said pizza, everybody was like,
Yeah.
Excellent, thanks everybody.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm just gonna load my presentation.
So the next one is the proposed downtown zoning changes around employment space and setbacks, and Asia is gonna give us some direction. You need a couple of minutes?
Nope,
You're good to go?
yeah, I'm just gonna fire up the presentation and then we'll get to it. I'll try to make it fairly short and sweet. I just want to give you guys a little bit of background first off. So every year the planning department brings forward like an omnibus zoning bylaw amendments. For the most part, they're like housekeeping stuff, small corrections, things that we kind of pick up and track through the year, and then we prioritize those, put them all together, and then bring them forwards. So this year we did the omnibus, and within the omnibus there was a few changes.
One, Elaine will actually be speaking to later around Cleveland Height, but we also brought forward 2 changes around increasing the amount of employment space, particularly second floor office space or commercial space, as well as we're trying to improve our streetscapes, and so we brought forward setbacks. I'm going to get into the exact proposed changes further on in the presentation, but I'm just trying to give you the background of like where we're coming from for you guys with this. So we brought these changes forwards, and they made it through to public hearing. At the public hearing, a lot of residents and landowners and business owners came out and were quite against and upset about some of these changes and felt like they hadn't been consulted enough. So we heard that message loud and clear, and working with council, we have done further engagement. So earlier on this month, we held a community engagement workshop and discussed all of the changes with the community. And then we figured we should come to ADP because a few above and beyond the proposed changes, we want to look at other options or incentives or alternatives to what staff have proposed to see if there's anything else that can make it more palatable to the community. So that's why we're here with you guys today. So I'm quickly going to go through the downtown vision. I'm going to discuss in detail what the proposed zoning changes were, and then we want to throw it back to you guys to talk about the options and potential solutions. So for the rest of the presentation, I'd love you guys to keep in mind that we're seeking your guys' feedback on not only the changes we proposed, but also your ideas and suggestions on how we can create more employment space downtown, as well as achieve really quality, vibrant streets. So those are kind of 2 key things. So for the downtown vision, we have been planning downtown since the early 2000s. So it's been almost 20 years of planning downtown. We have a bunch of plans. They've gone through various iterations through the years, but right now we have a draft downtown neighborhood plan that's being integrated into this OCP update that Sarah's working on. And the 2 kind of critical messages around that is that we want to create complete communities. People live here, people work here. It's not just kind of a bedroom community, and that there's good jobs. And we really envision downtown as being the employment hub and the core commercial area for Squamish. And we want to support like a healthy mix of different kind of commercial and employment opportunities downtown. And then from the streetscapes perspective, we really want to aim to activate our downtown streets, bring people out onto streets, have people linger. We want them to be safe for everybody to move around and incorporate not only car, but also cycling, walking, every other mode of transportation, and encourage those alternate transportation modes. And then really we want to do placemaking. We want to make it unique, we want to make it full of life and where people want to stay and shop. So those are kind of the overarching visions for downtown. So the 2 goals that were sort of driving the proposed zoning changes were to secure employment space, to foster local employment, and then to enhance our downtown streetscapes, make them pedestrian, bike friendly, all while maintaining parking. So the first zoning change is around employment space, and so we've proposed, and this is just for the C4 and the C10 zones, employment space at grade along street frontage, as well as employment space on one other story, be it a second story or above, again along street frontage. And then we proposed a minimum unit depth of 10 meters. The 10 meters came from the kind of, there's a standard, it's like Architectural Institute of America says 10 meters is a good commercial depth for you to actually achieve usable functional space that most commercial businesses can use.
10 meters being the minimum. Usable space could be much larger than that, but it's anything beyond the 10 meters doesn't really work.
So and some of the further rationale behind that was things like at the Artisan building, there's kind of those corridors where they have the art gallery display, but it's really just a hallway depth, and then there's the parkade behind that. So we're trying to avoid unusable commercial space that doesn't work for most businesses, and try to get the space to be usable. And then for the setbacks, again, this is only for the C4 and C10 zones. The proposal is to increase the front setback, which is at 0 meters, to 2.5 meters, and this would only apply to lots that run along Pemberton 2nd and 3rd Avenues. And this is arising because along those streets, we have 20-meter wide road right-of-ways, and we simply cannot fit really great streetscapes in that amount of width. So if we want to have 2 drive lanes and parking on both sides, we cannot fit wide sidewalks, bike lanes, or even landscaping in that amount of space that's left over. And so that's what that front setback is coming from. So it's envisioned that the building would shift kind of backwards on the lot, and try to kind of show that here. So right now it's directly abutting the front lot line, and by shifting it back, we're hoping that space can be used for not only sidewalks but also like patios and stuff that is going to liven up the streetscape. And so to try to offset any loss of potential development area for developers and landowners, we also propose decreasing the rear setback by the same amount. So it's like the building envelope is shifting backwards on the lot. So when we met with all of the public at the workshop, we threw out a lot of different ideas to them, and I wanted to highlight these for you guys. But don't feel confined to just talking about these items right now, but these are just some of the things that we brought up. So playing around with parking, can we reduce parking at all? Maybe we look at skinnying up the driveway widths. It's from a double wide to a single wide driveway width. Increasing the amount of parking that can be bought out, and then that money would then maybe go to like a parkade, like a community parkade. Car share, or sharing parking spaces, so residences use the parking at night, but the commercial uses it in the morning or in the daytime when the residences have left. Loading, again, playing around with increasing or decreasing certain dimensions. But we also discussed flexibility in the design, so instead of just being prescriptive with the unit depth, maybe requiring just a certain percentage of commercial and employment space be incorporated into the design. Live work was one option that somebody in the public engagement brought up, and it was very well received. And then other incentives such as density bonusing or density transfers. So if you don't want to build commercial space on your property, you can give it to somebody else or sell it to somebody else, and kind of trading densities was another idea that was thrown out there. And then, of course, for the streetscapes with the limited width, that if we don't change the setback, there's going to have to be trade-offs, and it's going to be between all the things that we want to see in the street. So we've actually opened a survey to the public, and we've got almost 200 people have filled out the survey right now. And one of the questions was, what's your priority? Or rank your priorities, like is parking the most important thing, or having bike lanes more important? So we're trying to get the community's feedback on these items in case these trade-offs have to be made. And then there was also some creative options that came out of the workshop, such as changing Cleveland and 2nd to one-way streets, having one-way bike lanes. So the bike lanes, people are going both directions, but the bike lane is only on one side of the street, and having a centralized parkade for everybody to use. So those are the options, and if any of you read the staff report, they're kind of further discussed in there, but yeah, I would love to have a discussion around things that we've proposed here and answer questions if they're confused on
I have
it.
a question. So the whole idea of centralized parkades, Has there been any looking into the availability or the viability of purchasing land in you know, 1, 2, 3, whatever it is, centralized areas? Because those parkades only really work if they're in a good location that is going to really feed the residential and commercial immediately around it. Like, is that doable in Squamish as it is?
Yeah, so we, for the 2017 work plan, we're doing a parking study.
We're gonna be doing the traffic study. You know, we've done the parking strategy, which, you know, indicates that we will need a parkade. The district has some property around downtown, but it's either park or it's not an essential location. So that's something that we still have to resolve.
Yeah, but I think we are doing more work. The parking strategy recommended doing like a survey to identify like what our parking needs are going to be. How much is a parkade going to cost? How are we going to pay for that? And so that would be tied back to those parking buyouts. So right now, people pay $6,000 to buy out one parking space, and just doing like a rough survey of what other municipalities charge, it's usually between 20 and 40,000 per parking space. So 6 is on the light side. But we need to, you know, prove all of that out and explore all of the options. So that's what's on the work plan.
And what about the sort of the with the traffic study? Did that look into the idea of doing several one-way streets downtown? Is that a viable option too, or is that?
Yeah, I think we've asked our engineering department to look at that because everybody's really interested in this idea. Usually it's the engineers that kill it. So they seem to think that there's some internal discussion that is happening.
Where are the hydro lines on the properties on Second and Pemberton? Does that affect shifting within the laneways or on the street?
Some are on the street and some are in the laneways.
So
So
that'll affect
it's
the usefulness of
non-consistent.
allowing people to push back. That 2.5
Totally.
meters, you can't build back, you're already having to be set back 20 feet
Yeah.
or 10 meters from those transformers, so it might be important to look at the strategy for utilities on the lanes or on the streets relative
Yeah.
to that. You know,
And it's
landowners
not,
aren't
yeah, it's
literally
not that, I
2.5
mean, it's
meters.
just Second, Third, and Pemberton. I shouldn't say just, but, you know, it's a limited amount of streets. so you
Sure,
have to
but in
take
that
into
discussion, that
consideration.
diagram, it'll affect.
Yeah,
And
for
instead of
limiting distances.
a long-term strategy of going underground.
Yeah, if there's
Well,
some
that's
sort of
it.
commitment, then I think landowners might say, okay, then I can build the, what was it, a meter of the rear lot line, but right now they're losing that 2.5 meter, and that seems to be the pushback.
And I think
Yeah,
the
that's what
subdivision
we
development control bylaw does require to underground. That's
But you can only underground
recent
a block,
Yeah,
so that's what everyone's really kind of wants to,
yeah.
is you get that 20 feet of usable area. But there's just no way in the way we're developing, especially downtown with incremental lots, that I don't see it happening unless somehow it's a bigger move from.
Well, I think the district would collect money essentially
Yeah,
for
but-
each development. and
But
then-
it'd have to be everyone on the block.
Yeah.
Like a block is being redeveloped, and I think that's just a long way, so challenging.
We did find that we were a little bit involved with this, and that going a half level down does seem to have a lot of potential because your ramp becomes half the length, and you can go up half a ramp to the next level and still be within your first story, not affecting the second story. 7.5 feet clearance for every floor. Obviously, you get into a cost increase, but the first look at that seems like it can be reasonable. So there's very interesting things that is surrounding this, but the parking is definitely the driving factor.
Yeah.
The other one is that what is interesting is that taking the parking out at this stage is doable. If we find in the future that we don't need the parking anymore because transit works really well or people change their lives, taking the parking out at that stage is borderline impossible because then the buildings are old. So then the whole discussion came up with, why don't we build a parkade now, take the parking out, because the parkade can change later on into something else. So this is very interesting discussions about something that happens now and influence something else that happens, 30, 40 years from now. So it becomes very, very big picture.
Not only that, but if there's this increase in bike lanes, all of a sudden, the requirement to use a car has gone substantially down, so therefore the parking changes.
Totally.
So,
And if that's the case, where suddenly someday we don't need the parking that we built, then we should be building buildings that aren't 7-foot floors, but are normal floors that can be re-inhabited by not cars, but by
Yeah.
live works or whatever.
Or ramps, that's where the rampy challenge is a challenge, or then you're into cast in place concrete and it just squashes
Yeah.
smaller projects. On bigger lots, I mean,
Yeah.
we saw it on the big one on, is it Pemberton? The courtyardy one by BMO Bank, right?
They're doing a partially sunken.
Yeah, and they pushed back a bit, they still had a variance on parking, but I mean, it's expensive. There's some costs and geotech limitations downtown, so.
It's hard to do anything that, taking all the parking out, it's a very hard thing to do and justify right now and replacing that somewhere else. So, it's kind of you can do it up to extent, but the rest of it is that you're gonna have that space in the building that needs certain types of access with certain ramp sizes and all those things, and you kind of be stuck with that for the life of that building. So,
I would also be cautious about the strategy involving commercial space, parking spaces being utilized during the day, residential at night, because there are a lot of people that work remotely in Squamish, like either self-employed or working for other agents, like companies, what have you, but that they're not commuting every day or they're not going to drive somewhere that they need to drive to.
Well,
So
and on weekends, I
Mhm.
mean, everybody's kind of there on the weekends, so
Yeah.
then what happens at that time?
But for
So-
guest parking, I think there's a good trade-off. The commercial can be used as guest stalls at night,
yeah.
right? Otherwise, there's a requirement for X number of guest stalls, and when the businesses are closed, you've got 5 stalls.
Yeah.
One of the other things that came up was is that people are pushing back against the second-story commercial because they think that they're going to be empty for at least the immediate foreseeable future. And a possible solution for that is to allow them to be commercial and residential for the time being.
Yeah, I think that's something that we can look at.
Yeah.
We're almost daily now having people come into the office looking for office space.
Yeah.
So I think there's a real demand there, and
Mhm.
there isn't a recognition yet amongst
Yeah.
the developers that
Yeah.
there is a need.
But you might be able to take a little bit of that, the anxiety about that off by just saying to people, well, okay, we'll allow people to use it as residential, at least until commercial value pushes it past the point where. And that's where companies like that, Thomas Consulting, is exceptionally good at saying, this is your immediate requirement, this is what it's changing to, make sure you cover these sizes and these locations and have this mixed use. A very good example of that is in Whistler, where they basically realized when they started consulting with these guys is that if they don't put something on title that protects all the restaurants, that's saying from now on, all of these can only be restaurants, they were going to lose all the restaurants because the retail guys, they get more money from retail. So, and a community like Whistler without restaurants is just going to die. So, that understanding that you have to get into that little level of detail, saying this is going to be restaurants, this is going to be retail, this is going to be office, and what those percentages are actually comes into play here because we're kind of setting certain sizes that define certain uses. Yeah, that might be interesting to understand the detail of.
I wonder if you've got a survey that is asking people whether they want to run bike lanes or whatever. And I think whether it's wide sidewalks or bike lanes or more two-way traffic or one-way traffic, I think until you really look at these diagrams, it's hard to say, if you want bike lanes everywhere and that kind of thing. So my concern is I'm looking at these two street sections and notice the changes to second here. And to me, it's a very lifeless street, and it's getting too wide. There's too much coming and going. I mean, there's not that much bike traffic, even in the future build-out, that you need dedicated bike lanes for every street downtown. I think it's too much paved surface. I don't think you need to be pushing buildings back. I think you need to tighten up what's in the street to make it a much more interesting street. And it's okay for some streets to where bikes share the lane.
The problem is like every street downtown right now shares the lane.
Yeah, okay, so have one main commuter street or
Yeah,
something.
so-
One loop.
Or
That's
maybe
where the one-ways
it's
are
some one-ways, but I'm afraid these are ugly sections and
Yeah.
they're not attractive streetscapes.
It's nice to hear from the landscaper. So usually I'm biased the other, that you'd want more space, so, because I agree, I was one quite adamantly against the setbacks increase. Because I think it's gonna be such an incremental change, we're gonna have a really messy street front. And that causes other problems with dealing with sidewalks, dealing with waterproofing on the side, kind of weird places for people to do certain types of business or things, out of sight. So it causes other social problems that we might not always see. I like the one-way street idea because you could have a loop through downtown, say Pemberton, 2nd, round Vancouver, Loggers Lane, and you have one direct route for cars, and then you have a designated bike social space you could close down. So
And that can only be one lane. It doesn't
Yeah,
have
that's
to be
what I-
two lanes.
no,
So
agreed,
The other
totally
lane then becomes some of the space that we're looking for.
bike path or use
Yeah.
for cafes or
Yeah.
those, what are the parklets called?
What was the strategy on these two sections where one has the bike lanes inboard and one has them outboard? Is it just too
Yeah,
different,
so
or
I'm not the
what's
expert
it-
on this, but maybe I can invite Laura to come up to the table. But Carrie's really the one who was kind of gung-ho on the streetscape side of things, but I believe the intention is that 3rd Avenue is a separated bike priority street, whereas 2nd is more pedestrian priority, but it still allows for like a bit safer bike routes.
Okay.
Laura,
Apparently I'm here just in time.
did I nail that?
Yeah, more or less. I'm Laura Princik, I'm an engineer here at the district and been very involved with active transportation and generally the design of what we've come up with for downtown. So lots of really good points, and we've certainly had the same arguments back and forth about, hey, we don't want these crazy wide streets because there's something not so attractive about that, but we still want enough space for pedestrian and cyclist activity in a safe manner. And so it's a bit of a mixed thing. But yes, the intention was to have 3rd be the separated bike lanes. So those are all ages and abilities. This is the bike lane you'll feel safe taking your kids on and that kind of thing. And the idea being that it connects right from the rail tracks crossing at Buckley all the way through to the south part of downtown. So it's a continuous connection, like on the other side of Save-On, and made sense. And it's also the route to school for all the kids that live in the downtown area at the moment. Now, 2nd and Cleveland, we want those two to be more pedestrian oriented. So we see that people can take 3rd on their bikes as far as they can get, and then even if they have to hop off and walk them in, it's not too far to make that connection to 2nd and Cleveland. Having said that, their council is very interested in supporting bike facilities in sort of as many places as possible, which so we're trying to find that balance ourselves. And so the idea is that 2nd would ultimately go to parallel parking on both sides and support an on-street bike lane. That's not a big one, but just because and of course the conflict with the angle parking, it's really hard to see cyclists when you're pulling out, so it's just not a good overall. But that gains us a little bit of room to have those bike lanes on here. So was there anything else in particular that?
The other thing to keep in mind is like downtown is going to be probably 3 times the population it is now in the next 10 to 20 years. It's going to be a lot more people, a lot more kids. So it's creating that safe environment, whether it's pushing the buildings back or closing half the street. I think we need more space than what we have now. Like if you look at 2nd or 3rd, the sidewalks are super narrow. There's no bike lanes.
What's the argument for not doing a one-way street? Like, are there any city precedents, again, going back to other places, like, I always go to Hood River, like Boulder, like these little mountainy towns. Do they have one main street two-way, and then are there any examples that are successful?
I think that the challenge with one-way streets is that you don't necessarily gain as much space as you think you do, because you still need, you can't lose capacity So now we're getting sort of more into transportation
Driving
engineering. Yeah, you still have to keep your capacity. So theoretically, you have to keep 2 lanes going south and 2 lanes going north. And then so you don't really gain any of that additional space, because guess what happens? A UPS truck pulls up, as they do all the time downtown.
And we're reducing.
And then,
loading
and then there's no second lane to
requirements.
even cheat around it, which we've all done, I'm sure. So like it's a really tricky, you don't gain as much as you think you do, but it creates all kinds of other headaches and confused people and assorted trouble. So,
On the other hand, we'll just push more people onto the sidewalks and the bike lanes if the streets aren't that great for transportation.
hey, if you
I mean, I
want
just
if you
see-
want to create a traffic jam,
Well,
let's go.
part of the reason why people bike and walk more, because driving a car makes no sense, and it's such a walkable, you're everywhere within 10 minutes downtown. And I just know myself navigating downtown, I go the same route, the same lap, every time in and out, and it's gonna change when we have another out at either Vancouver or across the project we saw last week. Pemberton. So I just see everything in terms of that could easily be accommodate loading stalls on the public streets that we are having trouble fitting on private. You know, the requirements for loading bays comes up in every project, with people wanting variance on that because people don't deliver in the same way. They deliver on a UPS truck at 3 in the morning and need a pullover. So to me, that kind of kept private landowners not handcuffed and development still not being hampered, and then maybe start to organize downtown to a commercial strip that is where council is wanting more office on Second, i.e. drive down and then loop around Cleveland. So I thought that, I don't know the traffic flow kind of logic behind it, but experientially I thought that'd be a really great way to experience downtown, direct people to the waterfront along Vancouver.
Would there be existing buildings that are relatively new that are going to be non-conforming to the new proposed setback? So they would really bugger up the ability to push all this back, and that would be my concern, that you can't just take out buildings, right?
Everything in purpose
So
right now.
where in this diagram is the current property line? So right down the middle of that sidewalk, and that would be really valuable to see what your existing 20-meter corridor is, or is this a?
Yeah,
Is it
Is
so,
it achievable?
I mean, we haven't really seen any new construction come on any of these streets so far, but you guys know, and you've approved and we've looked at them, is stuff coming down the pipe. Fortunately, projects like the main and then the one on 2nd Avenue, just in the next block up here, both of those actually did have setbacks from the front property line that, you know, staff kind of worked with the developer and the designer to come to a solution on that. But we're doing it like super ad hoc. And it's always, you know, working with a developer and trying to get these things really,
We never get
it's a
connectivity
challenging
then,
process,
things we want,
so.
right?
No, but I think you have to look at the long run as well, you know, if the building, a lot of the downtown is older stock buildings and they're gonna be redeveloping, if not now, soon. Some of the new developments they didn't introduce a 2.5 meter setback, you know, a meter or a meter and a half, so it's gonna be this.
Yes and no to redeveloping soon, because, I mean, since looking at Cleveland Avenue personally, I've looked at Lonsdale, I've looked at 4th Avenue, I've looked at Broadway. There's
There's still
sections of
homes.
those major streets in big cities that haven't changed in 80 years. And so why is Squamish gonna change overnight? And I know there's a lot of activity, but
Get
I
more
think
traffic.
you might be surprised how long it really takes for all those old 1- and 2-story knock-ups to
And that
change over.
supply relief, it fits a need. You know, there's businesses in there that wouldn't be able to go into a
Yeah.
brand new space, they can't afford it,
When
so.
you can't afford to build a 2-story new building right now, does it make financial sense? We want-
No,
I think it depends on
it's
the zoning,
25
what
foot
the
lot.
zoning allows you to do. If the zoning doesn't allow you to go above 2
Then it
stories,
affects land cost.
then it's not gonna be developed. But like 2nd and 3rd, the zoning is probably gonna be concentrated not just on commercial, but residential as well. So I think there's more likelihood that we'll see redevelopment on 2nd and 3rd and Cleveland.
And
But
the two
Cleveland's your heart.
proposed,
You wanna kill the heart.
No, we don't.
the two proposed changes really
And this
ask
does not.
for,
Yeah, this is the next
Why is
discussion.
Cleveland
Yeah.
the heart I mean, I always question it just because someone's got to poke the bear, but we don't have the historic buildings that like Nelson does, or any buildings worth keeping, right? So as much as it's a nice street, maybe second becomes the really active. You can't rule out that if it does get redeveloped, because of the zoning is accommodating for value of land, like maybe it's more important we get that right, the streetscape and the traffic. Yeah.
So I have a question about that. Does the new OCP say anything about commercial and 3rd, 4th, and 5th Avenue in that direction? Is that commercially zoned the same as this, or is that intended to be purely residential?
Second and third.
Yeah, and 4th and 5th. What
I
happens
think
with
the
the
draft
Yes,
downtown
residential.
neighborhood plan definitely sees second and third as being same type of development as Cleveland and second right now. And then from there on if the use area is more higher density residential.
And then the other question that I have is that do we have any example of any other community in a similar circumstances where a second-story commercial worked really well? Or is this us trying to provide space in a specific untested format? I mean, obviously we can compare it to Vancouver, but it's not really great.
Yeah, I think just one place comes to mind, because I've also thought of this, Banff. If you look at the downtown Banff, there's all those great restaurants on the second floor. Generally, office space is cheaper if it's on the second floor. It's more affordable.
Victoria's got quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Size, but some great, all downtown, and then now they're mixing residential.
Yeah.
But I think the idea, I mean, it's the challenge with zoning and being prescriptive is, I'd love to see those second floor units be residential or live work, so they could be separated, but knowing long-term they could be work, if that's what it changes into. It's kind of this slippery slope with being too prescriptive and forcing people to give us something, but
Flexibility might be the key thing that allows us to have some organic growth in it by allowing it to become what it wants to become.
like a separate unit, I always think
Yeah.
the fire separation between, say, 2 floors of residential above and that second floor being owned by that unit. So they could rent it out for office, or you could have a home office, or you could have a suite. But all those uses kind of work, but it's a separate unit somehow.
One of the probably the most prominent things that we have learned is that the more flexibility you build into the commercial space, the more type of business you just protect yourself so much from keeping it alive and not having
Resilient, right?
newspapers against the windows. Yeah, just
Because we don't really know what's gonna end up happening. Hopefully, it doesn't just turn into a bedroom community, but we could end up with, an increasingly large pressure on the residential here, but maybe that increasing demand on commercial space, office-type commercial space, sort of levels out. So all of a sudden, having a whole bunch of empty commercial space, while there's tons of people that are leaving town because they can't find a place to live, doesn't make a lot of sense, being able to adapt to it. And then, again, as the building owner, as the value of commercial and the demand goes up, then they can choose to convert it back to commercial space.
Commercial's easier to build, it's great, if it's viable, like I'd love to build that all day long, because it's tenant improvements, it's very affordable, it's clean building. But everyone's scared it's gonna be tenanted. I mean, it's great to hear people are inquiring, that there's this tipping
Well,
point,
and-
right, where people are gonna build it and they'll come, or it's not gonna get built because you're handcuffed too
Yeah,
much.
and we're trying to look at it in the position that of Squamish as a whole, where else would office space, where is office space best suited?
Yeah, well, we all thought,
And-
man,
I was
Yeah.
trying so hard not to say anything.
And we're leaning towards trying to protect and preserve the business park and the industrial park now, because what we're hearing is that industrial businesses can't afford to stay in there anymore. So, that might not be the best place for office to go. And then Garibaldi Village is kind of built out, there's not a lot of
parking
room
space.
there. There's lots of parking.
Right.
I would love to see that happen,
Yeah.
but yeah, so we're just also looking in the bigger context of like, where is all this employment gonna go? And we'd like to see it go downtown.
I think the idea of having office not on the second, but any floor above is a good one line in there. Because it provides flexibility, so that was nice to hear. And then
But I
the
hear you
monotony.
on we
Exactly.
could maybe increase the amount of flexibility in the proposed change.
Yeah, and I don't know what the right way to do that. I mean, all the organic cities in the world, like Tokyo and these crazy places where you can do anything anywhere, they're great cities because you have that mix. That's how you get, trying to plan and zone mixed-use neighborhoods is really hard. I don't know if you guys are probably the more successful ones.
I think you just need to have flexibility.
Yeah, so
Let-
that's hard to do in zoning.
Let it
How
happen.
do you zone and put bylaws that are flexible?
Victoria is a really good example, it's, I grew up there, I think is a really good example. I don't, maybe from an engineering standpoint, it's a nightmare, I can't speak to that,
Okay.
but tons of one-way streets. The buildings are all zero
Proud, yeah.
frontage, most of them are max 3-story, but there is such a mix in these old and new buildings of residential, office, commercial that's going on just about all different levels. And that's a big concern, especially I think on streets like 2nd and 3rd already, is they're already kind of quiet, desolate streets. So creating these big, wide passageways through these already quiet areas, I think is just gonna further sterilize it from having, like it's that trade-off between that density and that everything being crammed in creates that vibrancy. It creates a draw for actually going and wanting to be there and see what's happening and to bring people down there.
I have a provoking question for probably engineering. What are you going to do with the really valuable laneways, which we don't have many of? But will they be streets? Can you allow residential entrance? Can you allow business on our lane systems, which are not on all streets, right?
Well, our lanes are actually not very wide,
Yeah.
as you know, already. They're a challenge for emergency vehicles and that kind of thing. They will be for sure, that's where we're gonna encourage all the parking garage entrances and stuff are gonna happen on those laneways. I mean, I know we have some, in-house visions where we'd like to see them a little more greened and a little more pedestrian friendly. And I mean, I'd like to see them sort of like you have to take your turn with a car, like not oriented so that 2 cars can pass each other at top speed, but that you actually have to share it and there could be other things going on. We also have a lot of our services in the lanes, so that's where we need to be able to access sewer pipes and then there's also the power lines are still in the laneways downtown.
Bike routes in the lane are.
Again, it's the narrowness thing that's the challenge, and we don't have frontages with the exception of perhaps at some point Loggers Lane. We don't have any frontages on the laneway. So then you're asking the
Building
cyclist to
frontages?
be, yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
that's what I'm kind of provoking, like so many precedents of, especially in a small town where we don't have the car congestion. Those could be bike routes, pedestrian thoroughfares, small shops, affordable office space. It's hard when we just design cities around cars' needs.
That's probably for me the
And we
most
miss
important thing
opportunities.
that is in Victoria is that if you see shop after shop after shop being a mom and pop shop, you realize the commercial space is affordable. You don't have to have a brand name company that go in there to be able to afford it.
Old buildings,
Yeah.
small sizes, so that's the other one to bring up is that,
Mhm.
what was it, depth?
10 meters.
10 meters. I mean, it's a tough one to I get why, so we don't end up with useless, but man, Victoria there again is just a great example of Fantan Alley and Johnson Street, these small little storefronts that are 12 feet wide and they work great because they're affordable.
Yeah.
And they attract the mom and pop, not, as soon as we go big, you're gonna throw a Starbucks in there, you're gonna throw someone who can tenant that space for $5,000 a month, so it's,
But 10 meters isn't that big. Like if you look at
if it's full width it is, so depth, no, I think you're right.
but if you look at Cleveland, all of those, or even Second Avenue, those commercial spaces that are there now, they're way bigger
Yeah.
than 10 meters.
See, what happens is that, and I think you touched on it, Chris, is that it's not that the width becomes a problem because you're only going to have an access to that on one side. I know how that plan works. You have to have a staircase in the front kind of in the building and in the back of the building because of what's happening up in the residential. So, but you can't have that staircase right in the middle of that space. It becomes problematic with what's happening with the parking. So what is the solution? Like, I had this experience, and I know this is going to sound way out of context, but in Hong Kong, we were walking on the 5th story from building to building to building to building to building. They were just, it's like one big building. And I don't know if there's this will contradict the ability to put the second story commercial on any other floor, but if these commercial and the second stories are connected, it kind of solves that problem because then suddenly the sizes can vary to whatever the need is on.
Fire codes would kill you.
Yeah, I know things.
All too well.
So we have, the survey's still alive. I think it closes tomorrow, but if any of you guys, feel free to check that out or just email me if you wake up in the middle of the night and have an epiphany and you're like, oh, this solution could work. I gotta send this to Asia. But yeah, I just wanted to say thanks for providing some comments and your opinions on what you liked and didn't like and some of the options and the changes proposed. So,
Could I comment as well?
yeah.
I think when I think of downtown Squamish and what's really going to change it, I think it's very livable, walkable sidewalks and street trees. Sounds really basic, but I think that will really transform the downtown. And looking at these sections, I think if you could only pick two things, those would be the two things I would pick, because I could see in the future that a parking lane on one side of the street gets obliterated and it turns into a two-lane bike lane. I don't see why that isn't possible. There's a lot of examples of that, but setting the tone of the street trees and that really walkable sidewalk is really going to change the energy. And I agree with some comments in terms of making this too wide of a street is really going to, for a while, it's really going to take away from that local kind of comfortable feeling. But I think those street trees are really going to transform the downtown. So I'd encourage really pushing that and letting the bike lanes over time kind of take over as need be.
Retrofitting.
Yeah, and I think the moves
Having it
on
be versed.
it was Third, right, that had the larger
The
bike
separating
lanes.
lanes.
I think that's a great move, but maybe that big move happens on one street and the other streets are the ones that see that more incremental change over time.
The blockers.
Like Dunsmuir up in Vancouver as an example, they took out the parking across the entire downtown core and turned it into a two-lane bike lane. I'm sure at the time people thought that the mayor was nuts, but it's incredible amendment now, so just my thoughts.
If I think a little bit of everybody's comments, for me, it seems like flexibility to grow and change
Yeah.
organically is kind of what we're touching on. It's like everything from the streets to the buildings to the
Yeah, like the bump outs that were, some of the examples that were given in the other towns too, those are great. They can really kind of add like more organic shapes and sitting areas and things too, but I would caution, I would want to see some caution taken of how much was invested in doing that when there could be something done that could allow a more easy transition into oh, okay, well, that's worked for 10 years, but let's take that out. We don't need that. We need more. We need a double bike lane. We need more sidewalk space. We need something else in there. Maybe we need more parking. Like maybe that does end up needing to happen, but yeah, I totally agree. I think flexibility all around.
Or continuity, one last point is that if you have a bike lane that's finished, like we rode the one through Rose Park the weekend, and it was great because we could ride it all the way. So I think if you had one from Buckley to the waterfront, no matter where it is, just one, that's more valuable than having, not being able to achieve that continuous, sinuous
like
line.
almost compromises on every street that kind
Yeah,
of.
and are we gonna get there? I don't know. Are
Well,
we
is
gonna-
the intent that you're gonna wait for every developer to do their little bit, or is the municipality gonna come in and do the whole street?
Right, and that would be the right way, but probably not.
It'll
Yeah,
end up being a
I mean,
mix.
when we worked with Langford, it was dog patch, and we did the streets, and then everything filled in. So I think at some point, the municipality has to take it by the balls and do it.
Yeah, it'll be a mix because we do have developments, kind of rolling around right now that we're working on
Yeah.
bike lane design with them. In some cases, they may do a design, like they may complete their design, cost it out, and we may just even collect cash in lieu because it doesn't make any sense to make them complete the bike lane portion of it. Like they'll have to build a sidewalk and curb,
Yeah.
but not necessarily complete the bike lane, because then you end up with this weird
It is. Yeah.
patch, like, oh, I'm in a ditch, oh, I'm in a bike lane, oh, I'm confused, like, right. So, yes, and then having said that, council has been very supportive of putting cash into the capital fund for active transportation every year. So every year we are building new sidewalks and curbs and building some bike lane facility. But it's, it's gonna be kind of slow going. Like I don't see us realizing any of this for another 5 to 10 years for sure. that we're,
Closing the street could
what's that?
be, going down to one-way streets could be, I mean, that sounds like a simple solution.
Well, I think the simple solution is taking out one side of parking, street parking, and putting planters out and making a bike lane. You know, what I mean? Like that. And I think that that's what we're gonna end up with, because I think we're all gonna get impatient with a 10-year process, and we're gonna say, no, we gotta just do it and try it, see what happens.
I think that's the key. It's okay to try it. It's
Yeah.
okay to be open-minded enough to say, this was not a good idea, and change it again.
Yeah.
The challenge is in some of these cases, if we don't get those building setbacks, then we're gonna put sidewalk where we'd like to have trees, as we'd like to be able to have both, but we really can't support trees in too small of a space.
I think
Just
though,
it doesn't
when
work.
I go through your cross sections, everything is kind of largely sized. I think some of this could tighten up. So you're 5 meters over your width here. You're almost 25 meters, and you got a 20-meter right over. I would work within what you've got, and so, I mean, 2.9 meter sidewalk, I don't think you need a sidewalk that wide.
But if you're gonna have commercial spaces, you wanna allow people to spill over onto the sidewalk from those users. Like, look at Cleveland, right, that's a 25
Yeah, but it just
wide
seems,
street.
too big. Yeah, and I would look at other cities and really successful streets. Is that a 20-meter street? Is it an 18-meter street? I don't think Squamish needs 25-meter street. And it's gonna take a lot of effort to move all those buildings back in time, right? Newer existing.
And I don't think we're fixed on the idea that 25 is the answer. I think the way we came to that is partly based on Cleveland. Like, I think most people agree when you go to Cleveland, because there are trees, because there are wide sidewalks, even though it feels generous in terms of you can walk, you can pass people with a stroller, you can, like, there's a comfort level, but there's trees to keep it from being vast and, unwelcoming. So we went with 25. I don't think that's the fixed number,
Yeah.
but
Maybe
it gives
every
something
street
to work with.
doesn't have to be the same, but they can have different purposes.
What's engineering's opinion of the parkade idea?
I don't know that we have an opinion per se, but I would definitely, when you were talking about Victoria, I was picturing all the parkades.
It's
I
amazing,
know, I know.
because you go, I've like always lived outside, and you don't think about it going into downtown Victoria. You're just like, well, I'm just going to the parkade. If that parkade's full, there's this parkade. So you don't have to worry about, because if you just had to rely on street parking in Victoria, it would be a nightmare. But by having these, and the buildings are so integrated into just the streetscape of downtown now, you barely even pay attention to them. So that they've just, everything else has grown up around them, and that way it could take some of the heat off of having to provide parking to accommodate future growth on both sides of the street of every single street in downtown, which would really affect the character of it, I think.
And I think that's a budget item for next year, right? Is sort of reviewing the parking strategy and the intentions moving forward. So
We're not sure of the timing, but it's definitely,
You're gonna have to collect
I've
the real
seen it.
cost of the parking in lieu though.
Yes,
It
and that's
costs
part of
It
the,
costs $20,000 to $40,000 to build a parking spot, so collect it.
that's part of the review process that
Yeah.
will go on. And it is just further to the parking issue. The other piece is that we actually do ultimately want to discourage so much car use downtown as well. Like, it would be nice if not everybody had to drive their car downtown and used other modes of transportation, be it bus, be it whatever. And that day may come when it becomes less convenient to park and whatever,
But they did successfully, Victoria did the Galloping Goose trail, like they did that I was kind of ahead of its time when that actually went down. So now it's taken so much heat off of the need to have parking downtown.
Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to create all this business space and then don't have the parking to be able to feed that. You want to say to people who live in downtown, you don't need a car. But you don't want to say to someone who wants to come and do business in downtown, you're welcome, but hey, you have to walk to get here. Yeah, because if you're coming from outside of town.
A great piece of property to do like a public-private partnership. Get a new city hall, a parkade, a park, and a bunch of office space. And build one great project.
we should
Sold.
project manage that.
Like that's how the hybrids are the things that make it feasible. Like,
Yeah.
That's like
all those
Victoria
things you
too,
want
the
could be
city
in one
hall.
building, and I bet there's someone in business head could wrap their financial numbers around that, and you're really great
This
at it.
is going through the process of looking at the needs of the civic center,
Yeah.
which is, we're not just looking at the civic function, we're looking beyond that,
Yeah.
affordable housing, parking.
I like the flexible comments. I think that anything we do and we get too prescriptive, you have to allow on these little lots, someone to be creative to make it work. And, I love the idea of joining them all on the second floor, and I tried that, and I wasn't allowed to. I had to keep everything set back. But so flexibility is good. Parking is very stressful for me because it's been a subject that I feel
It
very
never
strongly
goes
about,
away.
and we can't seem to get to the subject. Although I hear it coming from other people's voices now, and so something might happen there, but, we're forcing development to go commercial, and commercial is higher rate of parking, and so, everyone's kind of blocking against that, so, live work is gonna be something, I think, that's where you get creative. And we do have laneways. I think that we're kind of ignoring those. I think a lot more could be done on the laneways. Council, when we looked at this, there was a little bit of discussion about the corners, like where the clock tower is. And, we didn't get to that today. Nobody mentioned that. But, the idea of kind of a courtyards in the main intersections. So I like that idea. And, but if I take anything away from all this conversation, it's flexibility and what's the other one?
Strong
I think-
streetscape language.
Yeah.
What's that?
Strong streetscape language, like one tree,
Yeah,
one light.
the
that's
street,
good.
the street widths, that was another one. I mean, I think street widths are very important for this group to talk about because, council talks about it, and I can't speak for everyone, but sometimes people have a hard time visioning that. Like, councilors aren't necessarily visionaries. They see numbers or they see whatever their profession is, and so, it's like when we talk about all those buildings, well, when all those buildings get torn down and new buildings go up, I mean, I hear that. It might take 40 years. It's not gonna happen like bang. And but, I mean, if you talk at a council level, everyone goes, I mean, they talk about bulldozers coming in and flattening everything. And so, that's why it's important for us to hear you guys. And I'm trying to do a better job of reporting to council. Although when I get to report to them, it's at 11 o'clock at night and everyone's been there for 9 hours. I want to give a report and it's like, hurry up, kid. So, anyway, flexible, I think that's great. Anyways, parking is something that, it's been paramount for me for a long time, and I just, we'll have to wait for everyone to get it together and discuss it.
What's your opinion of the parking?
Well, 10 years ago, I was trying to talk council into buying strategic corridors for parking lots. 5 years ago, the same thing, and a nice corner would come up, I'd say, hey, why don't we buy that corner? The gas station one over here, contaminated site, perfect for a parking, because it's a contaminated site. But we have, our vision, the council's vision is we don't really have a parking problem because people are going to ride their bikes and they're going to take transit. The time will come. And, at the last ADP meeting, we were talking about parking, and it was the first time I heard, make sure the parking's 9-foot ceilings or 8-foot ceilings, because eventually we're going to turn that into living space. So, I mean, that's completely on the other end of the spectrum. Super interesting, and I'm thinking, wow, I guess it is going to go there. But there's going to be a little bit of growing pain between now and there where, so council has talked a little bit about parkades and looked at potential a few kind of locations, and there's murmurs of finding a spot and building one. I'm a little bit annoyed because of the density, and I shouldn't say annoyed because we wanted the density, so we have a lot of buildings that aren't built yet that didn't require any extra parking because we're one parking stall per unit. But really, they should have been buying, every 3-bedroom unit should have to have 2 parking stalls, and for every 3-bedroom unit, they should have had to buy one. So I think we lost a lot of opportunity to collect money for that. That's not your guys' problem. Anyway, flexibility, I think, is key.
Yeah.
I really appreciate what I hear here, because we talk about it, and then I come here and listen, and then, oh, I missed that, oh, that's a great idea, oh, and somehow we've got to get all these comments into council.
And staff will take the input from ADP today and include that when we report back to council,
Yeah.
as well as all of the public engagement feedback that we're collecting.
Well, I just have to add this comment because Asia is one of her favorite sayings is, if you read the report, you'll see it's in it. So as a counselor, well, what about this? And she goes, well, if you had read the report, you'll see it's in it.
That's a lot of
But she says it so kindly.
And I hear that all the time, and I kind of sticker to myself. Sorry.
All right, thanks so much, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for
Feel free to email me if you have any comments, and yeah, the survey is still going, so feel free to do that as well. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we have one more from Cleveland Commercial Heights that is going to be presented to us by
I think Jonas went to get her.
Mr. Co-Chair, I just noticed there's from the minutes last time, Ted's not down as being present, and Liz is down as being absent. Probably doesn't matter that she's not as being absent, but probably should reflect that everybody would be here.
Thank you. Sorry, but it's too late.
Yeah, I know, we've already voted on it.
Make noise.
Shall we take a couple minute break?
Go ahead. Okay.
So we're reconvening again. Excellent. We have lost Chris in the process. I don't know if you want to take a note of that.
Sorry?
That Chris has stepped out.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. And so this is about the Cleveland Commercial Heights. And this is being done by,
Elaine Naseby, I'm a planner with the district. Good afternoon.
thank you very much.
Thank you. So this is, I'll just give a presentation that staff gave to council this Tuesday afternoon related to the height of commercial buildings on Cleveland Avenue. And so this was from the council presentation. The staff was asking council, should the district revisit the vision outlined in the draft downtown neighborhood plan for building heights on Cleveland Avenue? And should staff explore tools for regulating higher building heights? So an overview of this presentation was first touching on policy and regulations, then the objectives, what do we want to achieve with height on Cleveland, look at some precedents, and a case study, a rezoning application on Cleveland, and then next steps. So further to that process, in regards to discussing height of commercial buildings on Cleveland, staff is bringing forward to council 2 rezoning case studies. So there's 2 buildings being proposed on Cleveland that are not zoned the downtown C4 zone. They're zoned something else. And so we're sort of bringing those forward with view and shade studies for discussion with council in regards to that building height on Cleveland. So following the discussion with council on those 2 buildings, staff will engage with the public and the property owners on Cleveland, and then report back to council with potential proposed bylaw amendments. So the policy, basically the 2005 Downtown Squamish Concept Plan, the different versions of the draft Downtown Neighborhood Plan, as well as the current discussion draft of the official community plan, they've all spoken to maximum heights on Cleveland of 2 to 3 stories. But they've also spoken to a vibrant commercial core, so they did not anticipate 6-story residential density downtown. The current OCP discussion draft, we've established new view corridor criteria as a development approval information area, but specific parameters around view and shade studies will need to be detailed in an associated procedures bylaw. So that view and shade impact has been presented in this draft OCP. With the intention being to assess those elements on proposed development. So stepping aside from the policy, the regulations, the zoning. So currently the downtown C4 zone does have a maximum height of 6 stories. Prior to 2016, we did not see any buildings higher than 4 stories. There's a few 4-story buildings on Cleveland. And then just in 2009, the BC Building Code did begin allowing 6-story wood frame construction. So that construction method, along with heightened development interest, saw in 2016 the first 6-story application was approved on Cleveland. So that's Cleveland just south of Maine. The project is called the Maine. And since then, we've had numerous applications for 6-story buildings downtown. The objectives of discussing the height of buildings on the Cleveland commercial core could be characterized in these 3 ways. So one is to create a vibrant urban environment, wanting to create some real vibrancy there that draws people to the downtown as the heart of Squamish. Encouraging economic investment on Cleveland through downtown revitalization and redevelopment. So that's that really key economic piece. And then third, to protect views of the mountains, which are incredible, from downtown. And we would characterize those views mostly as the Chief and Garibaldi. Staff did look at a few precedents. So number 1, Vancouver. So Vancouver does have protected view corridors. They're quite prescriptive. They've got 27 view corridors that protect views of the North Shore Mountains and the surrounding landscape. They also have designated areas for higher buildings. So this here is a map of the Vancouver view corridors. And so if a site is located within a view cone, the maximum building height allowed could be less than the maximum height permitted by the zoning, and that's determined by review by staff, basically. This here is an image showing the higher building heights in Vancouver. So those areas they've designated specifically as the central business district, so to mark the prominence of that downtown area. And then also to create gateways into the city from the bridges. They've got higher buildings there. The second precedent we looked at was UBC, which has a similar view and shading, view and building height. So they've got, here we're looking at their view corridors. So their main roads actually are on topographical ridges. So they've got these amazing views from the street ends. And essentially there they regulate it. So if you're in that orange area, that's called a type 1. So footprints of new projects cannot intrude into those view corridors at all. And then type 2 is those pink cones. And those are limited to height. So the height is reviewed. Here we have their map showing that they're looking for lower buildings in their central core area, the lighter orange, and they're allowing moderate and taller buildings in that darker orange color that's surrounding. Looking to a more local precedent, Whistler has done a lot of regulations in terms of their views and shading. And so for shading, they basically have these, they call them hot zones, which are the real public plaza type areas where you're not really allowed to shade those areas. Also, they're not public, but private patios and pools. So if your neighbor has a patio or a pool, they don't want you shading that. This here is a map of the Whistler view studies, which they've mapped out in great detail.
And then here we've got those sort of hot zones. This is an outdoor rooms map, and they've documented different characteristics for each of these spaces, including use patterns, seating design, and additional solar access considerations, which are taken into account in reviewing that shading, as well as their outdoor patios and pools map. And then just in a generic sense, there are other ways that views and shading might be regulated is the orientation of the street. So here, Cleveland Avenue is situated largely north-south, which is quite a good thing for sun, so sun will come through the bottom of it through the day, whereas if your main street is situated east-west and you've got tall buildings on the south side, then obviously that'll have a different shade impact, as well as historic preservation. So we saw mountain towns, for instance, that were preserving their historic lower building height core for sort of historic preservation reasons. So, Sabrina, sorry, do you want to join us?
Yeah, sure.
So this here is Sabrina Ghali. She's development manager with Daewoo, a local developer in town. And so this is her site, and she's done some really great view and shade studies that we presented to council on Tuesday. Sabrina at that time also brought forward an economic pro forma that we sort of looked at the economic element with council, but we're not bringing that part forward to you today, looking more for urban design comments and recommendations. So this, the case study number 1 site is located, it's the vacant lot at the corner of Winnipeg and Cleveland on the east side. And case study number 2 is actually my colleague Asia will be bringing that forward, and that's the Pac West site, so south of Oseum Pavilion, across from the main. So essentially Sabrina has done some view and shade studies for a proposed 4-story and a 6-story iteration on this building site. So here we've got an architectural perspective looking at, I'll just go back to the previous image. So that's sort of what we've got right now, very much low density height buildings downtown. This here is a perspective of what it would look built out on Cleveland, roughly to 4 stories. And then here we've got it at 6 stories. So I'll run through at first the views and then the shading. So we've got 2 views of the chief through this site, and so this is the first view with no building, and you can see the Mistral in behind. Separately, I've got some images of the approved Sirocco development, which is also in that area in this presentation. So that is the view to the chief from the other side of Cleveland with a 4-story iteration. That is the view with a 6-story building. This is a view of the chief from farther back, so along Winnipeg Street, again looking at it in its current state. That's looking at it with the 4-story height, and that's with the 6-story height. And so this image here is Sirocco on the right-hand side of the drawing, and essentially that is a 6-story building, and so that's also taken from the corner of Winnipeg and Cleveland. So now we'll look at some views down Cleveland of Garibaldi. So the top corner there, that's the existing site, and down below that is the view of Garibaldi with the 4-story build out. And here we have the 6-story build out, so you can see that we're fortunate that we can see Garibaldi down the street. This is the same side of the street as the proposed development at the existing height. Here we have it at the 4-story height, and this here would be at the 6-story height. Okay, last view down Cleveland. This is more sort of in the middle of the road. Again, the existing, the 4-story, and the 6-story. So now we're looking at the shade studies, and so we've got the 4-story and then the 6-story. Here's the 4-story right in the middle of the summer solstice. The spring and fall equinox shading are the same. and that's the 4-story during the winter. This is the 6-story in the summer, the 6-story in the spring and the fall, and the 6-story in the winter. And so further to that, these images here are from the Sirocco development application. So this is the 6-story Sirocco. It's on the Mampcamp Line channel. This is in the spring and the fall, in the morning. The Sirocco spring and fall at noon, and then again spring and fall, but at 4 p.m. So then what they found when they were studying their project was that in the winter, the shade from the chief actually shades part of downtown. So in the winter in the morning, it would be in the shade from the chief. In the winter at noon, that's the shade there, and then that's the winter at 3 p.m. So that's the end of that case study. As mentioned, we're also looking at another site. And then, yeah, we're going to be doing some public engagement and then coming back forward to council. So staff sees that some potential bylaw amendments related to height on Cleveland might be regulating height per building, possibly amending the C4 zone to a lower height, allowing discretionary height increase based on view and shade impact studies, essentially a density bonus. Per zone, so the north end of Cleveland, the center part of Cleveland, and the south. Maybe there's taller buildings at the north end as a gateway, going back to that Vancouver idea, having the Cleveland core at a certain height and South Cleveland at its own height again, or location within a block. So maybe the height undulates based on whether it's a corner site or a mid-block site. So there's a map if we're going to be speaking to that. This is an image in 2014, Squamish celebrated 100 years. And this was an image that somebody put together at that time. So then that was the last slide with council. I'll just give a summary though of what was actually discussed, the comments that we heard with council on Tuesday. So basically council asked sort of what is our intention, and that is for a vibrant and interesting downtown. So the view and shade corridors, speaking to the views down the streets, maintaining those at the street ends, maybe from certain key intersections such as Winnipeg and Cleveland, and from public spaces, so those seemed like the really important views to maintain. That there is a strong need for employment space, and that it's not from council, it sounded like there might be some support for separating commercial from residential use in that core area. One example provided was the Cornerstone building, the 4-story commercial building. So the status quo, there was a comment that the status quo, we're actually in a good position, that there is an intact, it was referred to as a high street area. So yes, there are vacant lots, but it currently is a commercial space that has its own feel. And then going back to that high street idea, so there was a comment on the potential benefit of keeping just the commercial use in that area in a smaller building form and maintaining the sense of place that we have there now. A comment that in other municipalities, you don't really see a lot of building height on a high street. Examples of that was Denman, Robson, and Commercial Drive, where Commercial Drive has maintained its commercial zoning up to 5 stories. So those are creating places that you want to spend outside. Concern that if the district does see higher mixed-use buildings with strong residential components, that there might be a resulting increase in commercial rents. So a comment on this Shoppers Drug Mart effect, where maybe chain stores only could afford the rents in those spaces. And then from an architectural point of view, that there are challenges with mixed use, particularly on small lots. So needing like a separate residential and commercial elevator, needing separate exits for residential use. Other architectural challenges on Cleveland, such as ideally a minimum of 40 to 50 feet in depth of commercial space for retail use. And that Squamish is unique in its challenges of accommodating underground parking. Which takes us to the next slide. So yes, there's limited parking on Cleveland. Smaller building height might ensure that there's sufficient parking for commercial uses. There was support for staff to research transferring development rights from this area to surrounding blocks so that you could have lower commercial in this core area, but still having that critical mass of people to use this area by allowing higher heights behind this area. And then an example of that was Gastown with a precedent of selling height to other properties. So sort of that idea of the residential directly behind the high street supporting it. So then, a comment that council doesn't want to see all one height. They want variety of heights and design. An idea of requiring lighter toned materials for the facade, so brightening up our downtown in sort of the darker months that we have. Support for sort of this podium style that Vancouver has. So the mayor had her Lego that she's been using at some different public engagement events. And so, rather than having a block, having a lower podium, higher point tower, allowing views and shade through that, allowing more space for public space, and then going higher where it's appropriate. Incentivizing 4 stories commercial possibly, and including variances on the parking, and a need for a public parking vision that developers can contribute to. Looking at the downtown as a whole, so it's all there to complement each other. And the idea of this wave form, when precedent was Surrey City Center. So the idea sort of having higher buildings in one area going down to a lower form and then back up to a higher form. All right, so we definitely would love to hear any thoughts and comments that the ADP has on this. Thank you.
Go for it, Chris.
I have a bunch of questions. I think like everything else is a challenging starting point, which is we don't have old buildings we're preserving. They're 2-story wood frames, so we're nostalgic about that scale, but we also want to reinvigorate this urban core that we're kind of planning for the next 4 years. So I guess I never want decisions made in planning or bylaws or zoning or architecture for that matter to leave us somewhere in the middle zone, like a beige city, or we're kind of going 4 stories, but here we'll go 6. I find the cities and the streets that are great civic spaces are full lot line, whether it's 3 stories or 6 stories, strong based, clearly articulated.
Chris, can I stop you for 1 second?
Could you? Everybody move into the table, ask for the microphone. I can't hear you.
So I question us grabbing these kind of characteristics from other urban areas that everyone has their opinion biases, and mine is that those wavy moments or the variety in scale and articulations actually causes a really busy urban streetscape and a really complicated, in a wood frame construction industry, complicated building envelope issues. So I would rather see, I think the 6 to 4 story shouldn't be discussed relative to shading and views. I think in real life that you don't experience, oh, last month I was here at 3 o'clock and I think I got more shade now. I personally don't think you experience that in a negative or positive way. But what I think we do get out of higher density is we get more housing, more commercial space, a more walkable neighborhood. And I don't know what that magic height is, but from experience, I think between 4 and 6 is the right place to be. I would probably discourage the height density transfer. I think it's a bit of a slippery slope. and it often ends up with these podium tower typologies, which I don't think fit the scale of a 34,000 projected population. I think we can get that density, like we saw in last week's presentation on the Mampam waterfront. We can get way more density out of a 4 to 6 story walkable neighborhood. Arbutus Walk in Vancouver, Olympic Village. You know, that Arbutus Walk is this neighborhood that was originally trying to go taller, and instead the diagram is flipping the tower sideways and having long 4-story walk-up buildings. So you get the same density, it's just not as high. So those are my big pushbacks. I think we should set a height and try to stick with it. The carveways and the jogs, I think, are really bad urban form and don't give the architects enough room to design within. We're prescribing too much. I'd like to discourage the discussion around shading and views because I think it's nostalgic and has negative impacts when we could get more social positive benefits from density housing and smaller units. That's my spiel.
Questions? Well, I think downtown Squamish has a land use pattern that's really beneficial. It's like the west end of Vancouver, which is rotated off the north-south grid, which puts it on a situation where there is no absolute street that gets shaded all day. And I think anybody who's designing a new city should always throw it off on the 45 or the 20 or whatever it is. This one's not quite as much as West Vancouver, but it means every street and every face gets some sun at some time of the day. So I think I'd kind of go with Chris on, I don't know if it's nostalgia, but I think you're not really expecting to get sun all the time on a street. So I think let that go. If you want sun, go to the park. But the fact that each of these streets will get sun at some time, no matter almost what height these buildings are, I think is a great land use pattern already set. I found the precedent images or precedent case studies that you, or precedent examples that you chose were a bit odd. UBC is an anomaly. It's not a city. It's trying to be a city, but it's a campus. Whistler is an anomaly. It's a resort. So I'd look to real communities or just real streets, whether it's Lonsdale or look to City of Victoria or Nelson or something like that, a commercial drive. Where you've got, you know, little wood structures that are there, it's really gritty, and I think we don't want to kind of wipe downtown clean. I think it's okay, we've got some dumpy old buildings for a long time, and that's what's going to make downtown affordable and interesting. So I think in that case, I would kind of support some density on other streets. Although I would never push commercial or Cleveland down to 2 stories. I think you'd kill it. You'd kill it for the current landowners for the ability to revitalize any of those buildings that needed to be. But my other concern is Cleveland has a really nice green. It was set up as 25-foot lots predominantly. For those to be redevelopment sites, somebody has to really, if parking drives redevelopment, you need to consolidate 3 lots so you can get 2 parking spaces in a drive aisle. And that's what this image here shows, these big blocks with space in between. And I think that would be really sad for Cleveland Avenue to lose that 25-foot green. And I think that then jumps back to how do you get the parking, well, like the City of Victoria, you put some parking garages in and maybe you do it better than Victoria, you wrap some commercial around those parking garages as a P3 initiative. Victoria's got some crime and cleanliness issues with some of those parking garages. But so my point is, Cleveland should stay that fine grain because we're getting a lot of big footprints everywhere else. So don't lose that, but don't penalize it by dropping it to 2 stories. So I would, yeah, somehow discourage consolidation of lots to any greater than 3 max.
None.
None. Okay.
None.
Okay.
You have so much brownfield sites,
yeah.
right?
And then the next point is, though, in some of your precedents, you talked about the open spaces. Well, what's the city doing or the municipality doing to create those spaces, those hot spots? Because you can't rely on all the private owners to provide this, so does the municipality gobble up one or two here and there and create that public space where everybody's gonna hang and get some sun versus an urban space versus a park space that we've already got on all the edges. So, I would say, yeah, keep it zero lot line, create real open spaces where you can. We've talked enough about the streets, but I think the orthogonal shift is a great beginning for this town, and we serve it really well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm not an architect or a landscape architect of any kind, so I'll talk more as a resident. The view and the shading doesn't concern me, because again, you can go somewhere else to get your sun. You have the views from pretty much anywhere in Squamish, so that would be a concern. The massing of the 6 stories on Cleveland, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around. I would prefer to see the massing further back off Cleveland. I agree the 2 stories is not enough, and somewhere in the middle there is 4 stories, maybe 3-4 stories. I like the varying heights personally. I don't like seeing all the buildings the same height. Just a personal preference.
Is there a city you've been that you like that? Or most? So I just think it's helpful for people visually.
No, I can't think of one. I'm just thinking more walking down the street, everything is all, whether it's 4 or 6 stories and there's no variation. But yeah, you do get into the issues with the sides of the buildings that are taller, the building envelopes and all those other issues, I realize, yeah. Yeah, those would just be comments as a resident, yes.
I'm coming from a similar place, I suppose, and as a resident. Personally, I support a lower building height. Not as low as 2, I understand that doesn't facilitate enough growth for Squamish, and that is something that I also am very concerned with. So I think that the 4-story makes a good compromise. In my eyes, I wouldn't like to see too many 6-story buildings lining that main street. Similar to the others, the shade is not a concern of mine when it comes to 6 stories, but the views would be from my side. I think that I walk down Cleveland a lot, and I think that although you can't necessarily take the perfect shot, sort of photograph of the chief or anything from Cleveland, but you feel you're in a mountain community walking that space, and I think you would lose a bit of that if you went up 6 stories too much along that streetscape. So I would support 4 stories.
I have to excuse myself.
Yeah.
I've got to run.
I like hearing all the comments. I'm really here to listen on this one. But the question is, for me, is there not going to be any, like when they showed Vancouver, they showed where all the high buildings were going to go. I know we're talking about Cleveland Avenue, but maybe we should have areas where we know where there's going to be a high-rise someday. Like whether it's on 3rd or whether it's the entrance to town. And what do you think about those mapping exercises that shows us the stuff around the outside edge? Those are just thoughts. But no, it's interesting for me because we went through this and I hear council and then I hear you guys, so it's like, too bad we weren't all in the same room. I know that wouldn't work.
It'd be great.
Yeah.
One time like this.
Sure.
Well, for me, I think this discussion about commercial height and everything along Cleveland is really going in reverse to what your OCP is trying to do, as in vibrant streetscapes, and this is I just don't think this makes any sense. In order to create a vibrant downtown, you want commercial. You want people living here, you want people staying here, so there's activity all day, all night. And reducing the height doesn't make any sense at all. In regards to massing and shading, and there's always a sunny side of the street and a shady side of the street, so maybe this weekend when it gets to 29, 30, people will go to the north side. Who knows, right? Depending on where you are. So, I mean, it is just a reality. And you know which side of the street that you're living on, you're having your retail on, right? You're rented, you're leased. So, and this business about shading, I mean, you know, the idea of doing these solar studies is really for, I think, higher massing, where, you know, you're, in downtown Vancouver, you want to make sure your tower is not shading my tower where they're residents. So this is, people got to realize that this is only a certain time of the day and the sun moves, right? And regarding views, that's why, getting views of the chief or not, do I need to see it from my lot? As in, okay, if I didn't buy a waterfront lot, then I'm waterfront envy. Like, no, you either have the waterfront lot or you don't, right? So that's why you walk out to the streets and you can see the chief and just look around, just turn, I just don't think it makes any sense at all, right? So, I mean, in terms of, for me, if you look at the traditional European cities samples, right? This mixed-use typology has been around forever, and residential is always on top of retail, and narrow, like very walkable, nice scaled streets. And I mean, if 6 stories is what, we're getting the first 6-story building built in downtown soon, so I think we should encourage that, because what are you trying to do right now? You're trying to bring people still into the city, and that's what you need. Thanks.
Good. Your thoughts?
I think for me the big question is, what do you want it to be? And when the comment of mom and pop is brought up, to me that is really what Squamish is. Carson mentioned Nelson, and that Main Street of Nelson, partly what makes it so special is it feels unique to itself. It doesn't feel like 4th Avenue in Vancouver, where every shop is in every city and it's not special. So I think the conversations about if the building becomes 6 stories and now it's too expensive for those businesses, is that what you want? I question that. I think it'd be a shame to just see a lineup of North Face and Arc'teryx in downtown Squamish. So that's where I start to worry about this being cranked up too much. I think the diagram that Ted mentioned about having that density planning diagram and really understanding on the downtown where we will go up and why and what that means to the bigger story, I think will be helpful for you to be able to put that line in the sand of saying, yes, we need density, and here's where it's going to go, and this is why. So what else should we? I think shading is I think it is important. I think it's important that because without understanding why, we avoid shade, and therefore the public realm becomes unwalkable, because you'll be avoiding, if our whole street is 6 stories, the whole sidewalk is shaded, you're not going to walk down, you're going to go a block away and walk down another street where there is sun. So I think it doesn't need to be this nitty-gritty study, but I think it is a valuable conversation to have. So those are some things.
Any comments?
You go?
Or the last?
After? Oh, the concerns about the shading, I was actually surprised to see how much printed space was given to that, because I think that it's this, we live in a mountain town, we live in a valley, like there's shading, there's houses in Valley Cliff that virtually get no sun all year round, like it's a reality that's here. So I don't think that the decisions should be based off of the shading. I still think relative to a lot of other towns in the world, 6 stories is not incredibly high. I think the allowance that there's sort of a fluctuation in building heights depending. I actually don't even think that I have a problem if there's like an incentive to, like, if they want to do something else, maybe they provide an entire rooftop
open space, like park almost for residents and users of the building, and then they can get a concession of having the building lower, something to that effect. But I don't see there needing to be like prescribed building height, like that's limited on. I'm not saying that right, but I don't see that the shading should come into being a major part of the decision making of this. Massing, yes, but I think that conglomerating lots together should be limited, because that's going to create a lot more of that variation is intentionally going to happen. There's a really good point about European cities that bringing up too, places in the Netherlands and that where you see these, you know, varying height, but largely pretty consistent building bases, but they have different colors, different surface treatments. Victoria's kind of like that too, with it very consistent in the style. The interesting thing is places like Victoria and Nelson is that they were largely built all in a massive gold rush type of flurry of building that happened in a very short period of time. That happened here. Fortunately, we didn't get that kind of building that happened here. But no.
Logs don't make as much money as gold.
Exactly. So I think that there's a lot that can be done about creating an interesting, unique streetscape, but having to say that it has to be lower building height. I think 2 stories is like absolutely going to kill the downtown. Like I think it's going to do the exact opposite. The thing with the 6 stories is that you then have this density of humans and people that they need a place to go. They need a place to go grab their coffee in the morning. They need a place to go and buy a newspaper. They need a place to go grab milk. They need a place that they want to go and meet a friend for a drink right down below. So by generating that, you actually create that vibrancy. It's not really about if you can see the chief or not, because 18 hours a day you couldn't see it anyways in the wintertime. I think in terms of the livability, because of the orientation of Cleveland specifically, you're pretty much always going to be able to see at least Brome Ridge and Garibaldi at the end. It's actually kind of perfect the way that it's set up.
Someone knew what they were doing back then.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. And in terms of the chief, you literally have to walk a block over. We now have access to the Mampram Line Channel that didn't exist 5 years ago. Like you literally could not even walk onto that, and now we're going to have that whole waterfront walkway, the park, that whole strip right there that you can get. And I think encouraging people to walk off of Cleveland Avenue is a good thing in terms of getting more circulation. If you wanted to talk specifically about livability, I think the idea of mandating that when the development happens that there is continuous covered areas of walkways on a place like Cleveland, because if you're stuck down there in a downpour and maybe you could go into several shops and you end up parking right in front of the one you need to go to, guess what you're going to do? You're going to go in and you're going to go out, because otherwise you're stuck out there. If there was some sort of coverage that was provided along there, you'd actually encourage people to stay. No, it could be glass. It doesn't have to be solid. But you know what I mean? It's like it's creating outdoor space that's actually usable for more than 3 months of the year in Squamish. Variations. I think that was pretty much it. I don't agree with the dark colors on the lighter tones that somebody had brought up, and that I absolutely am against that kind of thing, because you don't get, light colors don't create a vibrant community, they create a bland community. So I would much rather see a black building.
You don't like sandstone
Light
and beige
crystals.
and
No, I don't.
green?
I like the
Did
ultimate
they say light colors or color?
light
contrast.
colors. They said lighter tones.
Yeah.
Because I'd like to see color.
No, and that's what I'm saying is as seeing black, seeing charcoal, seeing color in there, like those European canal-fronted cities. That's what we want to see. We don't want to see a bunch of beige and gray. We have enough beige and gray here already. So.
There.
Okay, I think as a resident and thinking of it as a high street, I think 2 stories is too low, but, you know, a 4 might be okay, and having at either end, having taller towers that maybe exceed 6 stories. You know, there's gonna be some development on, you know, all along Namcam Line Channel for circulation. I don't think, yeah, you can always find sun, so shade doesn't really matter, the studies. Yeah, that's it.
My comments are going to be very reasonable this time. I think the reason why you guys are getting such very direct comment is because we got such really good detailed information on what people are actually seeing. So I hope you guys don't see this as, oh, we got a lot of very specific comments, but from all the development permits that we've seen, this is the first time someone shows us proper context about what is going on here, where is this, what is the influence of this on what's going on around it. And this should be part of every package, because it really shows us how does this fit into the community. And with a lot of other municipalities, this is absolutely standard. This comes with every package. So I just have a couple of comments, mostly what other people talked about as well. Personally, I don't have a problem with the variation in the building height. I do think that there should be a minimum of 3 stories, 4 stories. To keep the density, I don't have a problem with people buying out density, but you don't want to have someone buy out all the density and someone is stuck with an empty lot or a lot with 1 story. Mostly because of the other comments that we had before. It's like when you start having rooftop decks, having a little bit of variation there between them creates privacy and movement and other things. If you're next to a 4-story building, you still have enough mass around you. Especially with the bigger streets, it helps to create a little bit more of that enclosure so it doesn't get the big open, uncomfortable open spaces that we were talking about as concerns before. So I think that there's some regulation that can happen there. Personally, I don't have a problem with the sun. I think it'll come and go, especially in the specific location. The views, I think, can become an issue, and I think especially when people are asking for variances where it's parking or height or not sitting back to the upper stories, all of those things come up every time. And I think when people start asking for those variances, now it becomes an issue. Are you taking someone else's view away? Because if someone buys a property and they understand that's what's going to happen, that's the zoning next door, that's what they should do. When they ask for a variance, now I have a problem with it if they're taking my view away. So in that sense, I think the view does become an important feature. So, and I know in a lot of other cities, people feel like that about the sun. I don't think that you're going to have that problem here with what the interest is. The information provided there was really awesome to understand the context. And that's...
Can I reiterate with you now that I've heard everyone's table? Kind of jarred me. Yeah, I think Crosland's point, and it's one I harp on in kind of other projects, is that not allowing, like, period, any lot amalgamations, I think is what's going to give us variety in height, in building shape, form, because you can't fit, or it's really hard to do taller buildings on skinny lots. And it's going to require some flexibility in parking, but I think the benefit for the public and the benefit for the commercial spaces, these smaller 25-foot and 50s especially, are important. I think it's going to give us, tenfold. And it is really unique. Like Crosland's just reading of the site and the orientation, it was really spot on, something I wouldn't pick up on. And same with the benefit of having that grain through Cleveland. That's what makes it special, not the 2 stories. I think Johnson Street in Victoria is a great example. That's 3 to 6 story, 3 to 5 story maybe, shop house typology, so commercial living upstairs or hotels upstairs, 25, 50-foot lots, and it's colorful and it's beautiful and it's busy and vibrant. So I think
it's enclosed in too. That street doesn't get a lot of sun
it's a wall.
in it too. It's usually shaded when you're in there, but who cares?
But I think it's just reiterating that the lot size is what's going to give us what I think this whole height discussion is about.
So if we keep the lot sizes, it'll limit the height.
Yeah, so the big lots, I think we need to put a height limit on it. And maybe it sounds like by the public and most people, they're happier with the 4-story, and I'd love to see Shen's kind of suggestion of incentivize 6-story. If it's a 6-story building, like the one at BMO we talked about, and I know you're passionate about this idea, what are they doing? Is this a passive house building? Is this a affordable housing 30% affordable housing. And we saw that in the MUD 1 kind of rezoning, which I think was really great. It's flexibility, it's incentivized, it's 4 stories, but if you go to 6, the community is going to really benefit. So I think that's, again, how we're getting more out of the height, and we're going to get variety, because some people won't touch that. I don't want to build an extra $1 million in a project. So through block walkways is one Ted's kind of passionate about, but the idea of the civic spaces being on the waterfront and the peripheries, maybe there's a way to encourage some important connections across the blocks, not just at the side points. Because I think going to the waterfront for sun, or the beach for sun, or a public plaza for sun is what's seen all over the world in Europe, especially if the plaza is chosen in that location because it gets sun for most of the day.
And we have that in the park.
Yeah, I think we
With
do.
Oceana.
And the waterfront
The village
next
is
in
right there.
Mampong Channel, if we have these places, I think they just really need to be emphasized, pumped up, not whittled in this beige color right here, right? So, yeah, I think
I'm
that's
gonna
it.
start going rogue. Am I taking a paintbrush and just making like beige stuff?
Well, can I just ask one question is, you mentioned stepping back the buildings, and I noticed the modeling, I mean, everything was just square, 4-story and 6-story. I mean, stepping back when you're going 6-story or inverting some areas not to give it shape, I mean, is that part of what everyone was thinking?
I don't think it makes a difference visually. I think you're going to see that from the architect. Like AKA likes to step back their top story with their roof. I like square, proud buildings. So I think if we start to be too prescriptive again in our colors or what a building should look like, I mean, I just cringe because you're not going to get variety. You're going to get developers maximizing those out. And same with this, the 2.5 meter setback we're talking about previously. You're taking that away from people, you're going to get really crappy buildings because they're not going to be able to articulate anywhere because they're going to be maxing it out. So I think.
Sorry, because when we studied that, we realized that you can step back the 1st story or the 2nd story, but it does create an opportunity to step out the ones above it and then step back and yes, that will require variance under the existing.
Right.
But there's ways of creativity when you quickly realize will create some of the overhangs automatically that starts being stimulated. It's like and it stimulates, the more restrictive you get, in some ways the more creative you have to get to come up with it. So,
I think there's the example that was in here of there was a step back that was basically just on with the 1st story. I don't remember where it was in here, but it was just showed the 1st story out at the lot line, and then the subsequent stories were step back. But that doesn't solve, that to me, that decreases the vibrancy of a street. Like even if technically you've still got the same amount of square footage in there and everything else, there's something about a street kind of coming up around you, and like, you know, there's people's houses, there's office buildings, there's something to look at there. There's an intensity that I think is lacking in a lot of these older buildings, not just in Squamish, but in other places where it's just sort of there. It's like it's what you're looking at right here, and then you can't really see what's beyond that other than open sky. It doesn't create a feel of there's a lot going on.
I think those lot sizes restrict parking too, which is a good thing, right? So you can't do a 6-story building, and I just went through this because we can't fit the parking. So you're either asking for a major variance, which shouldn't be supported,
or you dry out all that parking. That's going to stimulate
only the commercial. Yeah, only the commercial. The residential, you still have to, you should meet because it's low, one per unit.
Well, the last time I stayed in Victoria, the hotel had 0 parking.
Yeah.
But they had a contract with the parking lot, with the parkade, and it was awesome because there was 2 pubs in the same hotel. it just stimulates such a.
They built a horse and buggy, right?
So was it Magnolia? Okay.
Do you want to hear from Sabrina?
Yeah.
So I'll just speak briefly. The intent of this, I mean, this is a prominent parcel downtown, and we want to do the right thing. And the right thing is a lot of different small things that I've heard from yourselves, I've heard from council. I actually think Councillor Pryor's idea of getting everyone in the room together is a great
idea. What I've said is let's use this site as a case study from the ground up and see how commercial works, how parking works, how heights work, how setbacks work. Let's apply it all to this site and then review the numbers, which I will fully disclose and did so on Tuesday, and see how we can make this, because there's going to be other infill sites like this. This is not working in isolation, and there's a lot of different interests that need to be balanced. As far as height goes, parking is going to limit height. I think the lot consolidation is a really good point. We also own the vacant lot on Victoria and Cleveland. We can't go up. We're in for a pre-app for a 2-story building right now, which is not necessarily what we want to do, but over the next 15 years, until this parking thing figures itself out, that's all we can do. So maybe this building only has a 15-year lifespan and we have to plan accordingly. And unfortunately, no, you're not going to get as nice materials as if we were building a 60-year legacy building. But it's going to give you the variety you want. It's going to be a more economic option for business owners downtown. So that lot consolidation is the first time I've heard that. And I mean, I shouldn't be saying this out loud because I'd love to consolidate with the lot next door. But parking is going to limit height. Our development right now at 6 stories is cost prohibitive, and we don't have sufficient parking. We have not anywhere near enough parking. Because residential right now, the ones that are selling for the highest price point are the studios and the 1 bedrooms, which means that's more units in my building, which means that's more of a parking requirement.
Right.
So for me, fitting all these pieces together is really, really challenging, and I do want to be open book and full disclosure. But right now we can't make it work, even at 6 stories. So 2 stories, my issue with 2 stories, and having spoken to other landowners in and around, because I mean they're very vocal right now, is you're downzoning their land. They paid X number. When anyone buys land, they look at the zoning bylaw as a law, as gospel, saying I'm permitted to build 6 stories. So I am willing to pay X. If you all of a sudden say they can only pay or build 2 stories, you've decreased their land value and what the bank has loaned them for that land value down significantly. So I think there's going to be a bigger blow up around decreasing the heights by downzoning as opposed to something clever like limiting lot consolidations. So I think there has to be a better way of approaching this. And again, parking is dictating the height. There's no way around it. You can't go down. It's cost prohibitive to go down. We've looked at it because we'd love to go up to 6 stories.
But to go up, you gotta go concrete is the other cost prohibitive.
Exactly,
challenge, Which
exactly.
we saw in that BMO one.
How is the parking working in your 4-story iteration?
We never actually ran a 4-story. We looked at what the maximum allowable density was, and then, all these conversations started happening around the zoning bylaw changes, and we said, okay, let's put the brakes on, and let's just start having an open dialogue instead of spending more money and spinning our wheels.
How wide is the lot?
Pardon?
How wide is the lot?
It's 119 by 119.
Oh.
It's a square, which is also a little bit of a challenge. So we have a courtyard up top, so it gives a little bit of light from various angles. But I mean, it's challenging to work within. And yeah, parking is going to limit us at the end of the day, because I know that you guys aren't going to say that, I can get away with a variance of 30 less parking stalls, which is kind of where we stand right now.
So how would you, as a developer, how would you feel about the idea of that, payment going towards a parking?
I love it, because it cost me 30 grand a stall to build it.
Yeah.
And if I can get a unit, and that's where, the numbers are kind of nice to have, to say, okay, if I'm gonna make this much income from a residential unit, and I don't have to build a parking stall for it, and I pay for an off-site centralized parkade, and I mean, from the district's perspective, I think there has to be a long-term plan as to what that parkade looks like, because it won't be needed in 20 years. But I mean, I think it's a great idea. And I mean, right now, even the commercial stalls are 6,000 per, and you're limited to 4. So there could be much bigger checks going to the district right now than are for those parking variances. But also, and further to someone's comment, if I'm selling a 3-bedroom unit, the market wants 2 stalls. So I'm going to have a harder time selling that unit with 1 stall than if I were to put in 2. So that for me that's reason enough really not to ask for such a huge parking variance, because I'm going to have more challenge selling these. So I mean, our opinion right now is like, do we wait 20 years until this all works itself out? But again, it's a prominent corner that we hope breathes life into downtown. I'm actually also president of the Downtown Squamish Business Improvement Association,
So my fear is if we make development prohibitive on Cleveland and no one does anything and it stays exactly the same, this is no longer the high street, this is a driveway to SODC. And that's a concern, right? So we need to see some life breathed into this, but just how do we do that in a way that's respectful?
Well, and how, like, realistically, what's the sort of timeline that it would take to enact something involving that, even if the details weren't worked out, but that there was a, okay, we're gonna move forward with the parkade idea, and like, let's start creating a fund that even if we don't know exactly
10
where
years
it is.
plus.
I know, but this is ridiculous, because those lots, those vacant brownfield lots that are there are the ones that are gonna set the tone for everything starting to change. So I think making it more viable for these lots to be able to do something that's like good looking, cost effective, is actually gonna fit in with all of this, should actually be really made a priority, because then everything else is gonna kind of snowball.
Some councillors don't think there's a parking problem.
Really?
The majority of councillors don't.
There isn't at the moment. You're right.
Well, there's not going to be one right now.
Yeah.
There's
I mean,
not one
the
right now, but when you build everything that's
When
coming
you're trying to
online.
plan and saying we need a variance of 20 parking stalls to make this work.
But they're gonna pay for it.
The market's bearing that though.
Yeah.
It's true. You can't sell a 3-bedroom unit without 2 stalls, so it's not gonna be built, and I think that's
They're
okay.
being built all along the waterfront there.
He's got more parking than requirements, because they can go underground, right, because of the dike.
1.2.
Yeah, but above requirements. So I mean, I kind of like that there's challenges with parking, because it forces certain, you gotta make a choice. Am I gonna build high-end 3-bedroom units with 2 stalls, or am I gonna build only 10 1-bedroom stalls? I think that's
But
okay.
how do we get a building going on your corner?
Well, it's a financial discussion more than anything, and it's hard because it's,
Yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, you can always go on the ground, understanding it's a financial, that's it. That's
or
all.
ramp up, like you said, and it's a, you have to go concrete to
But
do
now
it.
we're doing a floor of commercial, and commercial lease rates, and we have to take data that exists today. We can't speculate that, okay, yes, lease rates are gonna go up, we're gonna have all these rec tech companies come in. So that was what we were showing in the pro forma. Based on lease rates today, the gap in commercial to residential was about $4 million in revenue, or not revenue, but just value. So now we're putting in commercial. We're not even breaking even right now in the pro forma by way of including commercial.
So what about the idea where the second story can act as residential until the commercial lease cost?
Much better. There has to be flexibility, and I like the conversation that happened. It has to be organic based on what is happening, so that Squamish can accommodate the growth and employment generation. And I fully believe in that, if we can keep people working here as opposed to commuting outwards.
Maybe
And
it's
that
gotta
will
be
decrease,
rental.
that will decrease car
Maybe that's the
ownership
trade-off.
also, if people don't have to commute
And that's a
elsewhere.
great,
You can
maybe
do
we
sep-
force it to be
It has to be
rental.
fire separated, so it's separate unit, but short term it has to be rental,
Yeah.
if you're gonna use
Yeah.
that.
And then suddenly you force the stimulation of the rental market, which is something
And
else.
you can
that
have
we want.
parking variance on those units in the interim, because long term your parking will be small, most likely bachelor 1-bedroom rentals.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a workaround.
But I mean, you have to and these are all really good ideas because they're based on the market, right? And the flexibility that the market will let you to bear short term over the long term. So yeah, the rental market's very strong right now for residential, but it's not for office. So yeah, how can we transition that?
But this is gonna provide a lot of office space on the ground floor.
You think the market is strong as rental now? Wait until the interest rate goes up and you'll see what happens. It's gonna go crazy.
Well, I think this actually would be a really good thing of getting council and us all in the same room here, because I think we're all obviously all coming from understanding things at a different level.
Yeah, I mean, in the roundtable, I was going to talk about it a bit. When we talked about Waterfront Landing last week, I came unglued a little bit at the fact that
It wasn't just me saying this.
no, the fact that ADP discussed it after we saw it.
Mhm.
So council saw it, and we had all our comments, and we kind of liked it, and we did all this, and and then the next day, I came in here and went around this table, and I'm going like, oh my God, look what we're missing. I mean, council's missing all this conversation. So next meeting, we're reviewing that particular, council's gonna watch the performance next week. No, it's fine.
Yeah.
Everybody,
There's pretty consistent comments through all the DP applications and all these
Yeah.
roundtables. I'd say there's 10 points that come up again and again.
Yeah.
And a pretty strong direction of where everyone leans, so.
but,
That's
you know,
good.
but to understand council, that's a tough thing, you know, even after being here almost 6 years,
Yeah.
you know, there's so much coming at us that we could sit and have a nice conversation with everybody here for 2 hours.
But what if you had 10
And then
points
the
like
next
Nicole's
wave would
notes?
come in, and then the next wave would come in, and then it's just like, wow, that was a great conversation. And it's hard to get action on everything. It's just overwhelming.
Well,
Yeah.
the
So-
fundamental issue about parking is that we know Squamish is growing. We kind of have a pretty good idea of the demographic of where
Yeah.
Squamish is growing and has been growing.
Oh, man.
These are people, okay, if you're moving here and you're buying a place, this isn't moving and buying a condo in downtown Vancouver where you can take the bus, the SkyTrain, Uber, whatever, to get around anywhere that you can't get on your bike or on your feet.
But you'd like it to be.
No, but the thing
Right,
is
that would
though,
be nice.
Chris, is that we have to consider is it's not necessarily about commuting to work. It's not about commuting. It's about commuting up to Half Nelson. It's about commuting up to Whistler. It's about commuting, like, it's about your vehicle
But that's gonna change. I think.
is,
We're not gonna be the big trucks and sled decks and,
no, but I'm not even talking about big vehicles, but just a
Vehicle.
vehicle to get out there, to go and to utilize
shares.
everything that's here.
Car
I think
shares.
you still need to have a certain amount of autonomy and independence to go and explore.
what if that new parkade the district builds has a district car share program?
That'd be
and
amazing.
A civic space on the roof and,
Well, that's
Non-profit.
what everyone's counting on, is car share and
but
Yeah,
Harvard-
That's
Then-
great, but
then
for
when they're-
somebody who uses it as an
We
adaptive
looked at it
vehicle,
for,
I'm always gonna need to use my adaptive
Yeah.
vehicle. So it's gonna be big to fit into a parkade.
The one thing
could
that's
be
gonna,
a shared vehicle that's,
No.
no, not for everyone, I guess, a different.
Yeah.
the one thing that I think everybody's agreement is that the cost of buying out parking at the moment is ridiculous and can be changed without anybody that's gonna argue with it. The municipality has a very good argument to say, this is what everybody else is charged. If you don't like it, don't buy it out.
Build your own.
Stuff's not gonna get
Oh,
built.
exactly.
It's not gonna get built though right now. It's such a
that
tough,
simple.
building costs are through the roof. The market's iffy, right? So it's challenging because if you don't buy out those stalls at that price, you're buying them out at 120 grand, it's gonna squash small block parcel performers all day long.
Yeah,
So you'll get the big guys doing it, but all these, I mean, this is a big lot in my head, but all the ones that I would do, 25, 50, 75s, couldn't even touch it if you're having to buy out those commercial stalls. So it's a slippery, there has to be some horse trading of
Well,
smaller lots get,
For us to increase the price, we need to be able to justify that if anybody questions that. So we need to show how much is it gonna cost to build the parkade, how many spots is it gonna be, and then figure out the price from there. We have to do that, we can't just
Yeah.
look at what everybody else is
No,
doing
no,
and be
that's
like,
good.
this is the average price, we need to rationalize
Yeah,
that
that's a
value.
fairly easy exercise. There's tons of quantity surveyors who can tell you, this is how much it's gonna cost you to build a parkade. Just in general terms, this is how, per parking stall, there's your reason. Seriously, it's a phone call away for, it's
But
that easy.
don't think of it as just a parkade. It has to be
A piece of
multi-use building. It has to
infrastructure.
have something,
Yeah,
it may have
Commercial,
a soccer
street
field on
front,
top, it
yeah.
might have commercial wrapped around it. If you build a parkade like Johnson Street Parkade, it's like one big urinal.
but that's why it's a partnership.
But those are so,
wants
there's
trees.
so many better ways, I think,
Yeah.
of managing it. But even as sort of a baseline, I actually agree with what Derek's saying, is that if you were to look at, okay, this is like a lot, a space that the city already owns or knows that they have easy access to, and take that as like a case study.
Waterfront
go,
park on
How much would it
loggers.
cost us to put a 6-story parkade with this amount of residential on it and another level of civic
Yeah.
use
You can,
at the top, and then cost that out and go pay for the number of parking stalls that are in there, and just sort of do that back and forth, to have a car share in there. I think that's a brilliant
We
idea.
pitched,
to have a car
I'm not
share.
joking, the park on the waterfront of the Mount Cam Channel, I think is a perfect civic property. It's below the adjacent properties, we've seen this, that are being sheet piled, so you have seawall, city park. We do a 3-4 story parkade there with a park on the roof, or a great civic space on the roof. The new municipal hall, publicly owned car share, like, people would get behind that. It just takes a public injection of equity, but that model is used all the time for big infrastructure pieces like bridges or,
I bet you can even have this done privately. If the municipality allows you to sell your parking spaces, you're gonna have someone who's gonna say, I will put up a parkade, I will have the car sharing thing, and they can charge whatever they want to buy that parking space.
yeah, or
because the
commercial on the
market-
front or
The
something.
market is gonna determine that value.
Hotel on the front.
And
that
I
you
also,
all
I'll
want.
take all your parking spaces, this is how much money, I'm like, all of my parking space, if you don't like it, don't put in the parking. But the bylaws must support the very principle that you can sell your parking spaces.
And just add to what you said, Asia, that way you'd have a baseline to justify doing that, so that these projects specifically in these vacant brownfield sites, that no matter what goes on in downtown Squamish, having all these vacant, weed-filled gravel parking lots on our high street it's just never gonna really do anything to significantly change that until those can be developed. So I think moving that forward is, in whatever manner, as quickly as possible.
No, we hear you on that, and it's in the work plan. So, but we have to go through the proper process. We can't make one phone call and get it done. Unfortunately, it's not how things work.
And you said that,
I can excuse myself.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rosie.
Should we maybe look at wrapping the discussion?
Yeah.
Could you get?
Yeah. We'll send one bus around.
I know.
I think we ran out of time.
Yes.
Thank you, it was really good material to see the context like that.
Thank you for the discussion, that was
Yeah,
really
thanks for all the
helpful.
hard work.
Yeah. Can I adjourn the meeting?
Mm-hmm.
Second?
Second.